Hey guys,
Here
we
we
are
go.
live with Bey Logan, producer, actor, writer. I'd say martial arts historian.
Yeah,
Also, you are a martial artist yourself, of course. You have
martial
your
art
own dojo, don't
practitioner,
you?
primarily in Hung Gar and also Tai Chi. I have my own school, Kwai Fong Martial Club here in Hong Kong. And
Okay,
this is why we get along, because there's no beginning to my talent and no end to yours. So there's
there
no
you go.
there's no clash. But
There's
anyway,
no clash.
great to connect with you on this is a stormy Saturday night. We might get interrupted by the heavens. It sounds like Thor is like battling up above me. I've got a few occasional crashes of thunder. I'm hoping it'll be the same time as I give you some real scoop,
I
and then
hope
you'll
so,
hear the
man.
light. You hear this crash of lightning, and it'll be like, it'll
That'll be
underscore what I'm
incredible.
saying.
Yeah. Do you guys get a lot of storms and lightning in Hong Kong?
We this last week we've periodically had typhoon warnings, but actually, compared to the kind of storms you can get in Hong Kong, it's been relatively mild. So that's good.
Okay. Are the seasons the same as America? Like, is it summer for you guys right now?
Yes, it is. We don't have a particularly strong cold winter, though it does cool down, but not like Korea or somewhere. It's relatively mild. I mean, we don't get snow, we don't really get ice. So that's one thing about living in Hong Kong. It's you get a humid season, you get humidity, you
Mhm.
do get heat at the moment, very strong sunshine, and then storms, and then we have a quite mild winter. But it
How
is
are
seasonal.
Okay. How are the beaches in Hong Kong, by the way?
They're great. I actually just happily got a new place on Lantau, which is actually the biggest island, but it's a very rural, very like a Hawaiian paradise of an island. And
Wow.
I got a new place there with a beach just down from it. And they're wonderful. I mean, it's not the clear blue waters of, some Pacific island, but it's still really, I think there's a perception of Hong Kong as this kind of mega metropolis with gleaming towers and
Sure.
people firing guns like John Woo or doing kung fu in the streets or whatever you think of, right? And
Yeah.
actually, if you just drive, I mean, I think you probably know kickboxer, all of that stuff that's meant to be in the Thai wilderness is in Hong Kong.
I
And
actually
about
didn't know that.
okay, and it's about a 10-minute drive from Kowloon, and you actually can see in some shots cars driving through the trees, and that's
Interesting.
because they just realized that it's like the old saying, a tree is a tree, shoot it in Griffith Park. It was like, why do we need to go to all the challenges of filming in Thailand when we've got a jungle environment in the new territories in Hong Kong? So
Wow.
Charles Wang had put that together. So most of Hong Kong is actually rural wilderness.
Hmm.
You could shoot a Predator movie here.
Why not?
But
Kung Fu
it's like
Predator.
Kung Fu Predator.
Here's a hey Bay. Here's a question,
Yeah,
and we'll actually plug your
sure.
latest film.
Yeah.
This guy said, "I did not know he was gone. Is he not making movies still?" You actually just came out with Furies last year,
I
didn't you?
think he's referring to. I think perhaps he's referring to Tony Jaa. But
Oh, we're gonna talk. Yeah, yeah, we're gonna talk
yeah,
about
but
Tony Jaa.
I
But
but
let's talk
I,
about you real
I
quick.
I
Your
do
latest
indeed
film.
have a film called Furies, which has been on Netflix quite a while now, and it was, I think, the highest we got to was number 3.
Oh
And
wow, that's
so that
really
was
good.
it's a very intense Vietnamese female-driven action film. All the credit goes to Veronica Ngo, my producing partner and best friend. And so I'm really, really proud of her, and I think it's a great contribution to Vietnamese cinema. It's the prequel to Fury, which is
Hmm.
a picture we did a few years ago. But it's almost like, Alien and Aliens.
Okay.
It's in the same world, but it's a very different kind of film. I mean, the first film was more like Taken. This one, I mean, it's a very dark Charlie's Angels, I
Hmm.
guess, female. I'm trying to think what the equivalent female team-driven female Naked Weapon, which my girl Maggie Q did back in the day. But yeah, I hope people check it out. I think it's a film I'm very proud of.
Nice, nice. Hey, here's a question.
Yeah.
Why doesn't China use the Shaw Brothers IP to make movies?
I feel I've actually had a few glancing encounters with Shaw Brothers towards making films with them or rebooting some of the old films. And for some reason, it never really actually came to happen. And I suspect part of the reason is that the ruling powers that be at Shaw Brothers make so much money from the library, from other ventures, that the risk of mounting, shooting, producing, releasing a film and hoping it'll be a hit hoping you can sell it to Netflix or whatever. They just really don't want to be in that business anymore. You know, they have 700 films of the greatest, you know, of the genre. But they paid lip service to it. And I even had a couple of meetings and came very close to even going on to be a producer in residence. And at the last minute, when it came down to let's spend some money to make something happen, they didn't want to do it. And I suspect it's just same reason Golden Harvest don't. They've got so much profit from real estate, or what we call American, it's real estate, right? But owning land, developing land. That's such a sure win. You make a movie, you hope it'll be successful. Sure. And you wait a long time to get a return. You buy some land in Hong Kong or in China, you've kind of already made your money back. So on a business level, I understand it. But at the same time, I do understand these legacy brands and the fans in the West going, you know, why don't you do some more of those kind of movies? And it's a really good question. I got a couple of irons in the fire in terms of rebooting a couple of brands. But, you know, I'm obviously not, I'm just a short brother. I'm not brothers, you know, with all of the resources that they have.
Here's a question I'm kind of curious on. I don't know how much you know about this, but so Furies, for example, you can watch it on Netflix. So with streaming, obviously the business changed. Like, do they usually just give like a lump sum and have it indefinitely, or do they like pay for it for like, say, 5 years to stream?
Well, okay. I mean, I can talk about generally, obviously.
Just in general.
Speak specifically about the Furies deal, but it's become, I think, the nice thing about the business model of Netflix is that you actually have a platform which is open to increasingly foreign language content, which was a huge problem with theatrical and video before, that they're aggressively developing Korean and Indian language content. And they're also open to genre films. So they're actually financing, producing, and, you know, Netflix, Furies was a Netflix original. So putting their money and their energy where their mouth is. I do think for those of us who are old school, who would like to see films in theaters, now the theatrical window, it's like basically big blockbuster Marvel movies, franchise films, or quirky indie films. And the middle range of stuff that you and I like, you know, the action stuff, it's relegated to streaming platforms. But then people are doing great work. To my happy surprise, it's a bit like when vinyl came back. Now Blu-ray is just kicking it, isn't it? It's got these wonderful, you know, kind of bonus features and interviews and the stuff you can't get on Netflix. So I think the industry, in terms of being a content provider, it's evolving. And it did not reach a finite point of evolution with the streaming services. They are providing a really healthy injection of money and a platform for new filmmakers and old filmmakers to get movies done. But at the same time, you do have Blu-ray and you still do have theatrical markets. So it's just a natural, you know, it's like when I was a kid, you had 3.5 channels on TV and a phone that went shh,
I like those sounds.
And now, those were the days, eh?
No speed dialing anybody. Here's
this guy, the story. Do you want me to respond?
Yes, the story, the making of White Tiger with Gary Daniels.
Oh, well, that's an easy one. Absolutely. There was a couple of guys in Hong Kong. One of them is still happily around. One of them sadly passed away. It was Mark Houghton, Eddie Meyer. And they'd got some money together to make a movie, originally, under the title White Tiger. And they had no one to write the script, nobody to produce. So they called on me. And I was Mark's former Kung Fu student, friend. And we kind of dabbled in having a business to do films. So I moved to Hong Kong basically to make that film. And it was a really chaotic situation. I also, I think at that time, didn't have as good a grasp as I do now about how to deal with all these large personalities, particularly on an action film. And so at a certain point, I got fed up with it and I walked off to do Circus Kids with Donnie Yen and Yuen Biu in China as the bad guy. And it actually shows you what a brutal time it was on White Tiger, that it was actually a relief to be beaten up by Donnie and Yuen Biu for 6 months in China. Meanwhile, they continued, as far as I knew, they were going to make White Tiger in Hong Kong. But I had no further involvement other than I had written the script. And then while I was away, I heard through the grapevine the film had closed down. They ran out of money. Oh. And then they had edited a trailer, and a company, two brothers, I think they were called Vince, the Vince brothers, had raised money to make a new version of the film. No, it was called Tiger Storm. When we were shooting it in Hong Kong, it was called Tiger Storm. And then that was that. I mean, I didn't, I was owed money on the film, but I thought, the relationship sadly was not good between me and those guys, Mark and Eddie. And I thought, I'll never see the film again. I'll never see the film again. I'll never see any money, but I'll just go and do other things. And then I was at the American Film Market in Santa Monica, and I saw this poster, coming soon, White Tiger. Coming soon, Tiger Storm, coming soon, Tiger Storm. So I went in, and it was a guy called Roy Macquarie who was selling the film. One of the first guys to sell the Bruce Lee films. And I just chatted about it, and I just said off the cuff, I said, oh, by the way, I was the writer of this movie, and I never got paid. And actually, in Hollywood, that's quite a big thing, to have the writer, kind of not signed off on it. And so as soon as that happened, there was a big panic. And they came back to me, and they said, we'd like to pay you, and would you also like to work on the film? So that was completely rebooted, and the whole film was shot in Canada with Gary Daniels, Kari Tagawa, Julia Nixon-Soul, and I think I was the only person, apart from Gary, from the Tiger Storm shoot, to be credited and paid on the new version. And I still think it's one of Gary's better films. I mean, it's a really nice looking film. So that was a really good kickoff to my career in Hong Kong. I still, looking back on it, it's one of those things. If I knew then what I knew now, I probably could have had a smarter way of taking control of the production to enable it to be made, to be finished, and for those guys to fulfill their ambition. But at those days, I was like, well, I don't want to be in conflict with you. I don't really know how to deal with it I don't have the know-how to deal with it. So I'll just go, and you guys do whatever you want to do. And it was at the time disheartening, but I think it was a good lesson. And that was the story of White Tiger.
That's an interesting story. At least it still came out, and you got your credit. So.
No, I do think that's. And I mean, the thing is, I always talk to us. It's not called a tell business. It's called show business. So people can say whatever they like. They can say stuff about me. They can talk about somebody else. But if you're overtly stating to people that you have an intention to be a filmmaker, to produce, direct, write, be in movies, whatever, at a certain point, what you say about me or what they say about Viking Samurai is immaterial. What matters is what work you do that we can see. And that's where I think a lot of the famous keyboard warriors come up short, in that they're just always the party of opposition. They're like, I hate you, and I'm going to criticize you, and everything you do is terrible, and I wish you'd die. But that, who's going to remember somebody for that? No one's going to. Here lies the man who tweeted most viciously. If on my grave it says, here lies the guy who backed up Veronica No to produce Furies, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Hey, here's something that might be controversial.
Oh, here we go.
Did you investigate the Bruce Lee drug letters?
No, I was just one of those people that went when it came out. I had a couple of years back did this documentary with History Channel called The Death of Bruce Lee, where we investigated quite thoroughly. I mean, History Channel is kind of they're a machine. They have a certain way of approaching a content. It's not like having a free hand to pursue it and do the story necessarily the way one person, me, might want to do. But I thought we gave it a good thrash, and it was an interesting examination of a subject that seems to be really, it's like the Kennedy assassination. How did Bruce Lee die? Then, of course, these letters came out. I mean, I don't know if people know, but there was an actor called Bob Baker, he played the Russian he was one of Bruce Lee's students from Oakland, and he played the Russian in Petrov in Fist of Fury, which, funnily enough, I played that same role opposite Donnie in the TV Fist of Fury. That's awesome. So I feel a slight affinity with Bob Baker. But then his son had found these letters which seemed to indicate that Bruce Lee, as well as the cannabis use that I think has been well documented, was experimenting with other drugs. And I think I don't think anybody heard that news and was like, "Yay, that's something we wanted to hear about our idol. And I can't speak to the veracity of it, but at first glance, it seems it seemed that there was something to this. And I just have two comments that I would make. One was that if anybody was going to experiment with the human condition, it was Bruce Lee. Mm-hmm. And I think you should bear in mind that he was a child of the 60s, and not just the 60s, but West Coast Hollywood 60s, when everybody was, tuning, was it tune in, turn on, drop out? Was that the Timothy Leary thing? But that's what they were all doing. So within that context, I think it makes more sense. But I think, like everybody, I was really shocked that even as an idea, and I don't know if it's true or not, that a paragon of physical fitness and body, mind, spirit development like Bruce Lee was taking these potentially harmful substances. But I don't know that he was, and I don't know the full context of it. I don't believe. I mean, the only people who could really speak to this is the estate. I mean, the Bruce Lee estate, and I think they've been curiously quiet on it, and I can understand why, because it's like, are you now, or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? Was he taking drugs? Was he not? If he was, why was this? Why was that? It's like almost better to just not address it. And by my impression, we just had a huge celebration at my.
I wanted to talk about that. The 50
right for the Bruce Lee 50th anniversary, and I sense no diminishment in the legacy of Bruce Lee and his massive global culture, his status as a massive global cultural icon. I see no sign of that diminishing by anything.
I think it's growing, actually. I think it's getting bigger.
He transcends. It's like he was the most famous Chinese guy. Is what?
Oh, I think the legacy is actually growing.
Yes,
it's actually getting bigger.
Yeah, you used to have to say something like, well, he was the biggest Chinese star, the biggest martial arts star, the biggest actor from Hong Kong, and so on and so forth. And now I think you just have to say he is the most potent global, pop culture icon, who's not a cartoon character, who's not Batman or Mickey Mouse. But if you're talking about a human being, then it's Bruce Lee. And I can say honestly, I would not be here today, where I am in Hong Kong with the Eurasian kids I have, with the life I've had, if not for one time in a theater in Peterborough, England, seeing a black and white picture of Bruce Lee and going, it was like, that was my drug. I was like, who's this guy? Where's he from? What's he do? And my life took this other path. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is, when that happened, because there was no internet, I thought I was the only one. But then I constantly meet people, and I met a lot of them the other day at the big celebration we had at the Marshall Club, who had exactly the same experience, exactly the same. Well, I mean, they saw a film, or they saw a clip, or they saw a picture. But a good friend of mine, Wolfgang from Germany, same thing. Because of the restrictions of the theaters in Germany, he could not actually watch a Bruce Lee movie for a long time. And his devotion to Bruce was based on books and magazines and photos. But I think the image of Bruce Lee is so potent, even in not in motion, even still.
Oh, sure.
But it somehow has an impact. So he's interesting that way.
Very interesting. On that History Channel documentary, like what did you conclude on how he actually died?
Well, my theory actually remained the same during the course of. I had a theory before the documentary, and during the course of it, there were some interesting things that happened along the way. But the main thing was that if you look at the facts that we know that he had a seizure in the Golden Harvest Studios that almost killed him, and then he had a seizure at the apartment of Betty Ting Pei that did kill him. And on both instances, the only thing we know that is uniform is that he had consumed cannabis on both days.
Okay.
And on the second day, he had taken ginger beer, and he'd had a Equagesic pain-killing tablet. But there's no evidence that he had that on the first day. So by logic, you would say whatever almost killed him from an edemic swelling of the brain at the first incident, and he really died of the same symptoms, and the second time would be, the chances are it would have to be the same source or something similar. So what I believe is that being Bruce Lee, he could not walk down to the corner store and say, give me, 2 pounds of Albanian long grain hash or whatever. He had to have a middle person. And I think that person, whoever it was, and I have some theories, but I don't think I want to say it on camera, so bought this for him with, and it was in some way tainted. And so the cannabis he consumed at Golden Harvest and at Betty's place was tainted, and he had a negative reaction to it. And the first time, because they rushed him to hospital, he almost died, but they got to him in time. And the second time, because Betty was worried about the scandal of him being found in her apartment, and Raymond Chow also delayed, that's what caused his tragic demise, was the fact that he didn't get rushed to hospital in time. That's the best I can come up with the facts to hand. But of course, I had another odd experience. Did you see Attrition, the Seagal picture I did?
Yeah, I actually, well, most of this stuff's packed up, but I have a copy of it.
Are you moving? Are you moving? You normally have more stuff in the background.
Yeah, I like to use a story that quite possibly the same ninja clan that stole Frank Dukes' Kumite footage from his dojo robbed me. That's the story I'm going with.
Oh yeah, good.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, yeah.
They took your copy of Attrition, my copy of Attrition.
By the way, later ask me about the Kumite, and let's talk about that. Okay?
Oh yeah, we have to, man.
We'll get back. Let me just finish off on that last thing. So on Attrition, we needed an actor who was convincing enough to play the Sifu, the teacher of both Steven Seagal and his buddy in the movie, who's played by Louis Fan Siu Wong, who you might know from Story of Ricky and Yip Man. Anyway, so we're in Bangkok, and we couldn't find an actor who fit the bill, who could do a little bit of kung fu, who's old enough, who had the presence. And then I was in the minibus riding somewhere with Fan Siu Wong, Louis, and I said, "What do you, do you know anybody?" And he goes, "What about my dad?" And his dad, Fan Moi San, had been a very famous actor in Hong Kong, character actor in the 70s and 80s. Very colorful figure. He was in the gang world. He was in the movie world. He was in the kung fu world. He knew all the police. And I'd met him many times over the years, but I hadn't seen him. He hadn't worked for years and years and years. So I thought he'd passed away. So Louis said, no, he's alive and well, and he lives in Hung Hom. So I said to Seagal, I said, "Hey, what about using Louis's father?" And then Steven said, "I thought he passed away." I said, no, apparently not. So reports of his death were exaggerated. So we went to see him in Hong Kong, Elizabeth and myself. And then we took him for a health check because he was of a certain age for the insurance, right? And then we took him for yum cha, which is like Chinese midday meal. And then I asked him some questions for one of my books. I mean, I think 36 Chambers, Volume 2. Available now, unreleased. Anyway, I kind of interviewed him for that. And then out of the blue, Elizabeth, my partner in crime, she goes, how did Bruce Lee die? And he starts to tell this amazing story. Look at that. You got a hairless cat.
Yeah, there you go. That's Oliver.
Cute. How cute. And then anyway, but so we started to tell the story about how Bruce was attacked in a children's playground and beaten around the head and had an edema because of that blow, was taken to Betty's apartment. She was paid off. The doctors are paid off. And he has chapter and verse in detail. And so I don't know if you've seen the History Channel documentary, but we used that in a kind of a deep throat kind of way where, there's this mysterious, memory stick with the information on. But that's real. It looks a bit, when you see the documentary, you might go, maybe they made that up. It really happened. He did blow me away by going, oh my God, this story of his perception of how Bruce Lee had been wounded and what had happened since. And it was all, he had detail. And I didn't know what to make of it, but we thought, well, we'll include it. The thing is, it's really interesting because there's very few people from that era. I mean, he was a guy, you can see him with Bruce Lee at events. He did dubbing for some of Bruce Lee's movies. And he was at this kind of nexus between the movie world, the gang world, the martial art world. He knew all the police. 1970s Hong Kong was very there was definitely those circles of activity, and then it was all interconnected. But he was a guy, like the morning of Bruce Lee's death, he could call the chief of police, he could call the gang boss, he could call all these people, and in doing so came up with the the information that he had. And then I said to him, I said, well, how come you've never told the story and kind of made something out of it? And he goes, because I no one ever asked me. And then we were in Thailand, and then we had a dinner. Everybody was really excited to have him around because he was if you're a fan of Kung Fu films, you recognize him from Magnificent Butcher, where he plays the drunken master. You recognize him from Dreadnought, so many films. He's also in Year of the Dragon with John Lone and who's the star? Mickey Rourke. So he was in Year of the Dragon as well. And so everybody's asking him questions. And then one of the guys said, hey, how did Bruce Lee die? And then he told the same story. And again, with slightly different details. So I believe he believed it. So my leaning towards the tainted cannabis theory is because there's more evidence for that than there is one person's recollection.
Sure.
At the same time, Van Moisan is somebody who was on the scene, and what he's saying should not be discounted. It probably should be investigated. And yeah, I've left it at that. I kind of felt at the end of the documentary I'd done all I wanted to do, and I wrote my Bruce Lee and I book, and kind of like, it's great. There's a lot of other stuff happening with Bruce Lee. There's this fantastic Arrow box set, and they found all this footage. And people keep asking me, like, what are you doing with it? Are you involved with it? And I'm like, no, I found the Game of Death footage, the actual dailies in 1997, which people should probably. I'm not one of those big guys who says, hey, by the way, it was me, bow to me. But there's people. There's one guy particularly who probably should, acknowledge that more, because he's built a whole career. He's not known for anything apart from re-editing other people's footage for Game of Death. And I found that footage in 97. But at a certain point, I love and revere Bruce Lee, which is why we devoted so much energy to doing these celebrations and commemorations. But I didn't really feel beyond that. I wanted to keep doing Bruce Lee projects, if you know what I mean. But I enjoy it so much. I mean, I love it when they find this new stuff and the new books come out. I'm the first one to buy them.
Oh, for sure. Hey, how about this? Your opinion of Brandon Lee as an actor and martial artist. Well, real quick though, first question: have you ever met? I forget. Did you ever meet Brandon? You met Brandon Lee, right?
There's a picture that's been circulated quite widely on Facebook of a very young and hirsute me and him looking like, I look like I was about 15, 18, something. I was a kid. I was in my 20s, but it was me and him in London. And what was happening was we had met to discuss doing film adaptation of a book called Mantis, which was by an author called Richard LaPlante, who was a really good friend of mine at the time. And it's a great thriller about a serial killer who's using Mantis Kung Fu. And then there's a partnership of like an American, like a Caucasian American, like you, Caucasian American guy. And he's partnered with an Asian fellow. I think in the script he's half Japanese, or maybe he is Japanese. That would be Brandon Lee's character. So, I met with Brandon we did an interview, which was great to talk about, but that was a bit like, he was like, oh my God, another guy talking to me about rapid fire. But then we moved on and we had our meeting about Mantis. And so that was really exciting. And then we went to the bar and afterwards, and, I saw him a few times and we developed, friendly, you develop a friendship with somebody, you talk to them on the phone, you have a friendly connection with them, to the extent that when he died, it was like a visceral body blow, because he was such a vibrant, and had he lived, it was so interesting, the transition, because I knew him briefly back when he did Legacy of Rage for D&B in Hong Kong, which is his only Hong Kong movie. But at that time, he was absolutely dead set against doing martial arts in the films and being, trading off of his identity as the son of Bruce Lee. And that makes sense. I don't think Carlos Santana's son wants to be a guitarist necessarily. It's like you excel at something else. And then I think it reached the point, I think he was up for a role in A Few Good Men, the Tom Cruise picture, to play one of the
really?
Marines.
That's a great movie.
And it was like, somebody had written on the back of his photo, Bruce Lee's son. And he looked at it and he realized that he kind of had to, it was like a Bruce Lee thing. He had to absorb the system and move beyond the system. So he was like, I don't know if I can swear on your show, but he was like, F it. And then he went to do training seriously with Danny DeSanto and all the guys, you know, Jeff Amada and all those guys at the I think it was then the IMB Academy. And then he did Showdown at Little Tokyo with Dolph, and then he did Rapid Fire. And he really showed that he could do that stuff. And then Crow was kind of a transition film where there was a kind of stylized action, but it was a horror piece. And had he lived, he would have had the career of Keanu Reeves.
I think so. Yeah.
And not to put anything down on Keanu, who I greatly admire, but there's a lot of common ground with them. You know, they're both Eurasian, both in-person, gentle people who give these kind of roles. But I can see Brandon like in The Matrix. I can see him doing, you know, romantic comedies and other kinds of films, and up to doing John Wick or whatever the equivalent would be. And we were deprived of that, just as we were deprived of the films that his father had made. But I thought Brandon was a very accomplished actor who, by force of will, kind of also got to a very high level of accomplishment as a as an on-screen. Well, he was off-screen, he trained hard too, but we see him as a screen martial artist. And it was like I was on the set in Hong Kong at Golden Harvest when Shannon Lee did her action film, Enter the Eagles. And I was so impressed with her courage to be, because by my perception, she was by herself, no minder, no mom, no husband, nobody, just her. And she trained to do this in the studio where her father had fought with the same people, Corey Yun, who's, you know, had been one of the Japanese in the Fist of Fury dojo scene. And she's just going at it. And I think in the case of her and Brandon, they were both hardworking and they had something of that DNA. But what a bar to aim at! It's like here he is, folks, the son of Bruce Lee. Here she is, the daughter of Bruce Lee, and you just have to admire that. And I thought that they, in both cases, I don't know why Shannon did not continue on. Really, she didn't do. In my memory, the big thing that I remember was Enter the Eagles, where I thought she was great in that, both as an actress and as an action person. Sure. Though the film was not successful, maybe that speaks to it. And then Brandon, of course, tragically passed away. But it's so, my son, one of my twin boys, Calvin, was acting in a movie the other day, and his character gets killed. And he was so worried. And because, of course, he'd grown up with the stories of dear poor Brandon and that tragic passing on The Crow when he was shot by a prop gun. So it was very much in my mind that day when my son, my Eurasian son, went off to film a very similar scene, and I kind of just calling up the Mosetsudo, calling up the action director and asking him how they're doing it and what's the angle and what are you doing? You're doing this because obviously I've got some standing and experience in the industry. Sure. But I just have very warm memories of Brandon, and I wish we, as I say, we had concrete plans to cooperate. And by the way, anybody out, if you can find it now, I'm sure it's still available. Mantis by Richard LaPlante is a great read, and you can read that and think that is a film that was going to star Brandon Lee, you know, had he lived.
Very interesting. Yes. Hey, you had mentioned the Kumite. You wanted to talk about the Kumite, so I don't want to forget. There's so much to cover, but I want to.
No, I'm happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about. But I had seen. Well, I mean, by the way, you know, I so commend you. I'm not just saying this because I'm on the show, but I so commend you because for me, you know, as an aficionado back from the glory days of Combat Magazine, my magazine career, Impact, and then all the other things I've done since. I always, you know, fascinated by the same era that you're interested in. And so the Frank Dukes thing, what I couldn't understand about Duke Sensei was when I first heard about Bloodsport and saw the film, or even before I saw the film, when I heard about it, I thought, oh yeah, that makes sense. Because in Hong Kong in the 1960s and the 70s, maybe into the 80s, it was not unknown for triad societies to book out a restaurant or a venue and have challenge matches between kung fu masters or kung fu fighters who were members of their groups and have them fight. And actually, I think the aforementioned, I think Mark Houghton, if you know, he was involved with things like that. I never directly did it, but I knew that it went on. So I could never understand if I don't know, I have no knowledge whatsoever about what is the real biography of Frank Dukes. But if he said to you, I was in Hong Kong, they were having these matches organized by a triad society, the Hak Lung Black Dragon Society. And we used to have these, like, you know, Baymo or you know, Bay Choi, these matches. I would go, yeah, totally. And it was in a place like, and not as exaggerated as in the movie, but you had these people fighting and people betting on them. Absolutely. Sure. That went on. That really went on. The stuff that got me was when it went to, and I only know this from listening to your channel, like the Bahamas and the Pirate, went up and all this other stuff. And I was like, okay, that I don't know about, but I definitely, if he just said, I fought in Hong Kong in these triad run tournaments, blood sport tournaments where people bet, and you asked me, is that true? I would have said, yeah, I don't know. And by the way, there would have been no reporters there. There would have been no official record because it was an illegal activity in a British Crown colony. So, you know, if that is what happened, and for some reason he has never clearly said that, but that could very easily happen. And I had one similar experience, but not in Hong Kong, in Taiwan. I was there with Donnie Yen, and I always hated being perceived as Donnie's buddy or hanger-on or whatever. So I always wanted to find a role to define me so that when he introduced me, I would be his producer, his writer, whatever we were doing at the time. So we went to Taiwan, and even in Thailand, we had some trips to Thailand. I said, listen, just call me your bodyguard. Because I was, you know, bigger than Donnie, you know, and I would just walk around behind him and be with him all the time. And then I thought, it sounds more impressive. You know, when you're younger, you kind of want that thing, you know, like, hey, it's the bodyguard, not like it's his buddy. So and so we were out one night with this Taiwanese gang boss, and all getting very drunk, and he had his bodyguard with him. And then he says to Donnie, why don't we have our two bodyguards fight? And it was in the ornamental garden of a Taiwanese restaurant. Mm-hmm. And so they said, yeah, Donnie, of course, is like, yeah, go ahead, you know. And so thanks, buddy. So we went out there, and you know, I was training pretty intensely at the time. So I went in, and I had much longer legs like yours. So I was like, I'm just going to keep this guy away by kicking at him. And I was showing off a bit, plus a bit drunk, lots of pretty girls watching. Everybody was cheering. And, you know, it was all the gang people and then us, right? And then at one point I was really showing off. I did this high kick, and he kicked me right in the nads, right in the goolie. And I just kind of like, I mean, I won't say sucked it up, but I was like, carried on for a bit. It was a glancing blow, obviously, and then sat down. And Donnie said, hey, I saw he kick you in the nuts. I said, yes. Did it hurt? Can I demonstrate for you? Did it hurt? It hurt. But it was in microcosm the same thing, where you have a bunch of drunk, bored triads saying, you guys fight. And by the way, if you know, like, people might say, oh yeah, this Bey just making up. Ask Donnie, you know, like, ask Get Man.
You got a new title, man. So obviously you're a producer, you're a writer, you're an actor, now also Kumite fighter.
Kumite contestant.
Nice.
But I certainly know my limitations. And, you know, someone like Mark Houghton, I can see in his young days, given the background and situation, if somebody said to him, hey, you know, we want you to represent and go into these kind of tournaments. And I believe he did have, people like him had those kind of matches. I certainly wouldn't have done it in any organized kind of way. And it's not even to do with technique. I mean, back then, my technique was decent. Today, it's okay. That's mainly why people talk about me online rather than to my face. But, you know, at the time, I was training intensely, but I never had that killer instinct. I never had that desire to damage somebody. So if I was up against somebody like that in well, let me put it another way. Not an anonymous person. There are people where I can probably think about damaging them. Sure. But I mean, for you may know some of them. But if an anonymous person stepped up to fight me, and they had like mess and mayhem in mind in a competitive setting like that, I don't think I was the right guy for the job. But in the Donnie thing, I was kind of stuck because I'm thinking, I don't know. You never know. These things turn on a knife edge. If I had declined, or somehow we'd lost face, or made the guy lose face, or whatever, you never know. You don't know what might happen with those guys, the drunk triad boss. So it played out okay. But yeah, so that's my 10 cents on the whole Kumite controversy, which is the Kumite, as depicted in the film, used to really happen in Hong Kong. And anybody who says it didn't just doesn't know Chinese martial culture, does not have experience, and doesn't know the right people. Which, by the way, I mean, you know, it's a great blessing of my life that I lived the life that I lived. And I remember when I watched the beginning of Bloodsport, and you see all the different guys training, and there's a section there in a traditional kung fu school with like the altar and the lion head and the weapons, and I thought, wow, it'd be cool to have a place like that. And now I do. So, you know.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I actually had Benny the Jet Urquidez talk about his Kumite story in Hong Kong, where he went to the secret like place in the mountains. So yeah.
Oh, Benny talked about that, huh? I've known Benny. He's the godfather to my son Ryan, and he's a dear friend. But we never talked about that. But he is exactly somebody who would fit within that. I'm glad he said it, because you know how it is. I mean, sometimes I don't mind talking to you and saying whatever, but I can hear in the back of my mind somebody saying, what's he know? He's just mouthing off. And it's like, no, I'm telling you based on my own, experience. Yes, that's the right word. And then, but when someone like Benny comes in and seconds it, that's interesting. Yeah.
Benny doesn't talk about that story that much. And I only knew about it because somebody I know, who introduced me to Benny told me about it. And I was like, I got to try to get that story on my channel, and I'm so happy that he shared it, because I didn't know if he would or not. But I'm going to
go back and listen. I'm going to go back and listen to that.
But I'll send that to you later. Yeah, it's very fascinating.
Benny was the guy. Every arena of martial competition, he would willingly engage in. I mean, back in the day, he challenged the Gracies. He'd done judo. He did tough man competitions, traditional karate, Kumite, like traditional Ippon Kumite matches. Obviously, kickboxing pioneer. Then movies. He was the only guy to go toe to toe with Jackie.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, but and then the same thing about him, that the fact that he hadn't spoken about it before is typically Benny, because he's so self-deprecating, and it's like in the Death of a Salesman, when the guy is going to be in the high court, and he says, going to the high court, he never mentioned it, and the guy says he doesn't need to mention it, he's doing it. And that's Benny. He doesn't need to, like, you and I can talk about what he's done or did or doing.
Sure.
But Benny himself is very, he'll answer your questions, but he's not somebody out there, boasting and, being loud.
Yeah, and that's why he's a legend, because other people talk about him, just like Bruce Lee. It doesn't really work if they just talk about themselves. I just got to give
Benny's also a very profoundly Christian man, and I think part of the Christian faith is humility. And it's extraordinary when you look at his background as a highly skilled fighter.
Sure.
But I think the way he lives life day by day is an example of faith in action.
Let me give a quick shout out to the Jughead One. Thank you for the 5 British pounds. He said, "Great podcast, Viking. Greetings to your guest. Love and respect from the UK." And let me just try to catch up to Jackie Chan. Oh, maybe you could comment on this. I remember in the movie The Tuxedo and the Medallion, Jackie Chan started using ropes in the action and martial arts scenes. Why did he make that decision?
Well, by the way, I think he had often used wires, and I think if you look at the documentary I did with him called Jackie Chan My Stunts, you see there's a section there, and even before he did it, he actually was like, should I do this? Should I show them? A lot of the times, like for example, when you kind of whip somebody's feet from under them, they were using a wire for that. I think what that gentleman was referring to was using wires to give you like a ridiculously high jump, leaping thing. I can't speak for the Tuxedo, but Medallion, which I worked on as the writer and one of the producers, it was something of a fantasy action film where we were going one step beyond normal ability, because he plays a superhuman character for much of the film. So that was one reason. And the other thing is, I genuinely feel that when you're getting older as Jackie, it's hard to perceive, because Jackie aged so slowly, kind of like you see him, he still looks young, and he could play kid in Drunken Master 2. But then he understood how to use the wire to enhance what he could do physically himself. So I think it was just another string to the boat. The other thing that had changed was it used to be enormously challenging to use the wires because you didn't have digital wire removal. So you had to, if it was a night shoot, you'd paint the wires black, and if you had a day shoot, you'd paint them white, and you'd hope they weren't seen. But if you look at a wonderful movie like Iron Monkey, you still see a shitload of wires, even on and the horrible thing is, as you get to 4K, everything you can see on the VHS gets more and more clear, not less clear.
Sure.
So you see it even more. And then by the time of Medallion, we had a highly skilled effects team who were taking out all the wires. So that was another big change where Jackie could go, boy, I can use these and I can get away with them. But I still think the key thing was you could have put any American action actor of that era on wires in the same sets, the same movie, and nobody would go, hey, it's the new Jackie Chan. It wouldn't, because it's all the other stuff that makes Jackie special. And then if you use the wire to enhance him jumping over something, that's that. But I know listen, all of us want every rock star, every actor, everybody, every dancer to remain ageless. We want them to be who they always were, and we don't want them to get older, or we don't want them to die. And I do understand that feeling myself.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's extraordinary. Jackie is still a very viable filmmaker, particularly in China, and he can still pull off these extravagant action sequences, and he uses every trick in the book. And he does use CGI, and he does use wires, but this is kind of like enabling him his own innate skill, which is still incredible, along with those tricks of the trade, allow him to remain relevant. Whereas, I think it's hard to ask somebody of his age with his injuries to kind of do all of these sequences. By the way, it's a good segue into, I see they asked about Last Kumite.
Oh, yes, this question. I want to see what you think about this.
Segue into Tony Jaa if we're going to talk about it.
Oh, we'll get into him right after this thing. What do you think?
Okay, what do I think of it?
Kumite?
Okay, firstly, on a more profound level, seeing how challenging it's always been for me to raise money to make my own movies. Not all the time, but sometimes. The idea that you guys put this team together and raise the money on Kickstarter or something, and then you could make a movie, and then you get
of it, yeah.
And you got a director like Ross Clarkson, who I work with on Vixen in China, and you got all these wonderful people to be in the film, and you gave the great silent majority got heard, which was all the people out there who like you. And I've seen people, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but they mock you for being into that stuff. And I'm like, F them. I mean, people are into reggae. I have a friend in Hong Kong who's a rockabilly DJ. People are into stuff from yesteryear that stands up very well compared to the stuff being done now. And I think all of these films, all of the stuff that we've talked about, when I show it, for example, the other day in the wake of talking with Matthias more, I showed my youngest son, Sean, Dark Angel, the one with him and Dolph Lundgren. I don't know if you've seen that film.
Yeah, I Come in Peace, we call it. Great movie. Stands
up, scene by scene. You don't have to apologize for it. It's got so much going for it. And Sean really enjoyed it. And I had the rite of passage. Him and one of his buddies watched Bloodsport. Stands up, scene by scene. And then you see some of the stuff. Look at the Mortal Kombat movie where they had all the CGI and the action really wasn't there and what have you. It looks like something from the dawn of time. It just is so dated now. Not to pick on Mortal Kombat, and I'm breaking a rule because I told you before I don't criticize other people's films. Anyway, there are films where they're using early CG or not really fulfilling the potential of the martial arts genre, and the film looks dated the next year. Whereas the stuff you're talking about, and this is, I think, what is the wellspring Last Kumite seems to be drawing on. I got a point. I was no way involved with it, other than I'm the first one to buy a ticket to see all this stuff. It's a strange thing because I sometimes sense that people in the past were critical of me making films because they thought that they should be doing them, but they never did. And my feeling is I never think that about other people doing stuff. I always think, I hope I can continue to be involved in all the areas that I'm involved with. But at the same time, when I hear of somebody doing a movie or I hear of somebody doing something, I just want to see it myself. I'm like, I hear when's that coming out? I really want to see it. Like when I saw Last Human, I said, oh gosh, when can I see that? I don't have a thought in my mind of, so they're making an action film, and I never think that. I'm the first guy to plunk down my money to see, or if I can, of course, a lot of the time now you get stuff for free, and it's almost impossible to pay for it, in China anyway. But I look forward to seeing Last Kumite, and I also was fascinated by the business model. I was thinking, maybe I should do one of those. Maybe I should get all the B-list Hong Kong guys and movie with them, like a Dirty Dozen with those fellas, and see if anybody wants to see that. So it's an idea.
Yeah, the Last Kumite, I give a lot of credit and nothing but respect to executive producer Sean, because he had reached out to me talking about it, emailed me randomly, I think in January of 2022, and was kind of talking about this movie.
Yeah.
And getting all these legends and all that. And I was like, sounds really good. I wish you luck, But the fact that he made it, like he did raise all the money.
Goes back to what I said. It's not called tell business. I saw him telling you, I saw him telling everybody, and I was like, okay. I mean, and by the way, one reason I'm very loath to criticize other filmmakers is I know as much as anybody the challenge of actually physically making a film.
Oh, sure.
And I admire anybody who does it. I know the heartbreak when it doesn't come together. I know what it's like when it comes together and it's disappointing. And I know the wonderful feeling when you make something like Furies that most people seem to really like, and you can be proud of it. So when I saw that happening, I was like, okay. And then he did it. And I think I can't wait to see it. But, my full respect, anybody, I'm not just film, but anybody who says, this is what I'm going to do and does it and then releases it for us to enjoy is, in my mind, this kind of person needs to be supported and respected and admired. And I think it's a real shame. I don't sound like I'm, old Uncle Gus, get off, you kids get off my lawn. I just don't like the negative, the way that the Twitterverse and all of these chat rooms, they just seem to, and I don't involve myself with them, but they just seem to be, so negative about everything. Everything sucks. Everybody's terrible. Everybody hates everything. And you feel ashamed for enjoying life. You feel ashamed for being happy. You feel ashamed for enjoying films and stuff. Like I watched something the other day. Again, I don't want to say what it was, but a film, I think on Netflix. And then I was, being the geek that I am, on IMDb. Well, who was that guy? And what was that going on there? Where was that shot? And then you read the first IMDb review, the worst film of all time. This is the most. You know what? I don't even mind telling you which one it was. It was a film called, because I'm going to say good things about it. It was a film called Mother with Jennifer Lopez, and I thought it was okay. It was like a Taken-y kind of thing, and which I had an interest in because I did my female Taken with the first Fury.
Yeah, sure.
But I looked at that and I thought, oh, this is fun and interesting. And she went for it. And you can see that, they did some Mission Impossibly Bourne style action stuff. And I thought the acting was good and it was really strong. And it's like it was what would have been in the old days a B picture. But obviously it's Jennifer Lopez and it was on Netflix. So to some extent, it was an A picture. And you read about it, you'd think this was some ghastly, vile B movie. We were ripped off. We were lied to. It was this, it was that. And I just hate that. I don't know why we've become so bitter and negative and unhappy. I don't get it. And I don't think a life devoted to attacking and tearing down other people and just for the sake of having a voice, for the sake of clickbait, using your vitriol to attack creative people, I don't think it's an indication of a healthy society.
No, it's not. It speaks to the individual. They're unhappy, with their own life, and they got to get it out that way. It's unfortunate. And then it's just so easy to spread online because they don't just have to complain to their circle of friends. They could complain to the entire world.
For me, I mean, I don't post regularly or ever to any platforms, but if I see some work by an actor or director or producer that I admire, I would write to them, try to reach them privately and say, I saw this, I thought it was wonderful. And people do appreciate it, I find. Secondarily, I kind of like, if I see something doesn't work, my thought is just, well, good, they got that done, and better luck next time. Because I think if you look at the oeuvre of any filmmaker, any viable filmmaker, there's movies that disappointed you. There's films that didn't quite work. And what's interesting also is the fact that given time, these things sometimes do find an audience and do get better appreciated. There's a little movie in my canon of work called I talked about last time, Borderland, Covert Operation, where I still think Mathieu Vechsler, the director of that picture, who I've tried to use a couple of times since, but for various reasons didn't come together, is a wonderful filmmaker. And that film, people should look at it again. And again, IMDb was, this is the most awful thing ever. but it's not, that's the thing. To me, the most awful thing ever, and I'm not going to cite what they are, it's the Hollywood blockbuster where they had all the time in the world, all the money in the world, all the script development you need in the world, all the effects money in the world, and they produced something really terrible. And there's a few films I think we can think of that fit that description. Those are the ones people should be ranting about. And somebody doing something slick and cool for like $1.50 in Nanhai at the Faulty Towers of Chinese film studios, this person should be commended, in my opinion.
One last comment I'll make about the last Kumite. I do want to point out so obviously part of the budget came from Kickstarter. There was also some other private investors.
I heard that.
I think Sean probably even in fact I know he put some of his own money
in there.
Believes the project, and there is still an ongoing Indiegogo campaign, and you could get some really cool perks, signed posters, other things. So check that out, because that's going to help the post-production process, which, as you know, can be quite expensive. So I do want to point that out.
Good.
And then one other comment. Of course, I was in the movie and experienced in it, and there was just a magical feeling. Everybody was just in good spirits working on it. I know they captured a lot of magic.
That's what Matthias told me. He had such an amazing time doing it, and you never know. I think firstly, in the film world, you never know. I mean, and I hope in this case not, but sometimes you have an amazing, wonderful time on a film, and the film comes out, and you're like, oh, and then conversely, it's like hell on wheels to make something, and the film comes out, and it's very difficult. I tell you a funny story on a movie. Well, a movie that was, for me, was very hard work, was a film called Dragon Squad, which we did with Sammo Hung, Maggie Q, Michael Biehn, Hu Jun-ho. It was like a really fantastic international cast. The director was this guy called Daniel Lee, who's a great director, but not necessarily the easiest guy to work with. And what's funny is when you start making a movie and you normally see that the director will pick on somebody, like, because there's always the frustrations, and this guy is the whipping boy, and you spot who it is, and you kind of give him a wide berth, at least for the first week or so. But Dragon Squad, I was a producer on the film, and we started production on the film, and I'm looking, and I couldn't see who is the guy who's taking all the shit from the director. And after about a day or so, I realized it was me. But the movie, you can see it. It was released. We released it in America as Dragon Heat, and Steven Seagal, my buddy, was an exec producer on that as well.
Oh, really?
And I think the film stands up really well. I mean, it's a really solid piece. But like I say, it was really hard to do, so you can't tell. But I know everybody that I've spoken to who was on Last Kumite said that A, it was a really great experience, and B, they feel the film will deliver on that promise of, capturing all the things that made us love 80s martial arts action cinema.
Definitely. I mean, it's got all the right ingredients.
What is Warrior Island?
Oh, I'm shooting that.
I have seen that. Yeah, I've seen about that.
I'm shooting that next week. James Jefferson created it, and there's going to be a lot of guys on there like Ron Van Cleef, Dan Severn, Stephen K. Hayes, a lot of like really famous martial artists and fighters. So I can't. I mean, in a way, just bringing all these guys together like Last Kumite did. In a way,
Ron looks. How old is Ron Van Cleef now?
He's 80 years old, and he's still competing in like jiu-jitsu.
And he has abs and stuff, right?
Yeah, he's still in really good shape. So he's not your typical 80-year-old.
I saw pictures of him the other day, and I couldn't remember how old, because I remember watching him in like the Black Dragon, Revenge of the Death of Bruce Lee, and all that groovy stuff back in the day. I really greatly admire him. He's also a Goju-Ryu guy, the same as my my stepfather Tino Severano. Who do you think I was?
That's
Quentin
a good question.
Tarantino.
We have to go back to his comment, but he got it right. And thanks again for the £5 to correct it. And then Charlie. Oh, Charlie. Hey, Charlie, how's it going? I interviewed Charlie back in the past. Judo, great judo, a judoka. Thanks for the $5, Charlie. So let's go into what we were going to talk about mainly, because you had a lot. You said you had a lot to add, and you know a lot about the whole whatever happened to Tony Jaa. Let's just jump in.
By the way, I think at the top of our discussion, the guy popped up and he said he is making movies. I think he is. Having been involved with him for as long as I have, and in the detail I have, I think I'm entitled to an opinion. And I feel he should have been a much bigger star internationally as a lead, as a sole leading actor in international films.
I think a lot of us think that. That's why this discussion is going to be so interesting.
So let me take you back to the mists of time. So I was in Thailand making The Medallion, the film with Jackie Chan, and actually the scenes shot in Thailand were actually all set in England. What? No, wait a minute. Or maybe they were set in Ireland, which is obviously part of the United Kingdom. But anyway, so we were shooting in there, and then I met a guy called Robert Lee, not the brother of Bruce Lee, but a young manager, talent manager, and he always wore denim, very young looking chap. And he said, look, I've got this new martial arts guy. I think he'd be great. We should put him in the movie with Jackie. All right. So the guy came out, I think, to the set, or to the he came out to the set, or he came to the you know what, I'm so sorry, I got to open the door.
Yeah, you're good. We'll just catch up on these other comments.
Here I am. Okay. Sorry. Anyway,
you're back. That's great.
So the guy came on the set, and he had a VHS video cassette, and he put it on, and it was basically this rather nondescript young Thai fellow doing these incredible moves, evidently without wire, because it was shot on video, on these stuntmen in like a warehouse. And it was, I mean, just jumping ahead in the story, it was all the stunts that you were going to see in Ong Bak, but just done raw in a warehouse space. So I was like, wow, I saw this guy. And then I met Tony himself. He spoke no English, didn't look like a movie star, certainly not like the kind of guys that were being stars in Thailand at that time. So I took him to meet Jackie and the guys, and everybody was very nice. And Lo Wei Gong was there, Ken Lo, Jackie's bodyguard, who speaks Thai. But the general consensus was the guy looked great, the action was amazing, but we weren't making that kind of film. That there really wasn't a role for Tony in The Medallion. But in my mind, I was just going, this guy, whatever it is, has it. So I was working for a film company called Emperor at the time, who we were producing The Medallion. And I went back and started working on a project I wanted to do called Wireplay. And this was going to be a movie about 3 stuntmen to be played by the 3 guys I felt needed a break. One was Tony Jaa, one was Brad Allen, now sadly the late Brad Allen, remember from Gorgeous and whatever, who I had used by that point on Jackie Chan My Stunts to do, and he'd done the fight in Gorgeous. And the third one was Lewis and Fan Siu Wong, Lewis Fan Siu Wong. So these 3 in a movie, and they play stuntmen who are doubling and doing scenes on the films. This very arrogant Chinese action actor. So he gets all the praise and they get all the abuse.
I'm so sorry. This is going to add to his street cred, but it's just a hottie walking past.
Okay.
Saturday night at the Logans, folks. Anyway, so the lady in white. Actually, this is a haunted building. So then I wrote Wireplay, and the story of it is that these stuntmen decide to rob a building in order to get money to pay for their own film and then become stars in their own right. And while they're inside the building, real villains come in, and it would be like a Richard Norton kind of guy, close the place down. And then these 3 have to fight their way out and use their stuntman skills in this building. So it was like Die Hard with stuntmen and martial arts fighting with 3 guys and like 3 brothers together, like 3 musketeers. So I took this to the brass at Emperor, and they were like, well, it was that they're saying, well, we don't see that, if you're going to use a white guy, why don't we get somebody more famous than Brad? If you're going to use a Chinese guy, why don't we use Jackie? And if you're going to, and by the way, they said to me, isn't this Thai guy already famous? And I said, what do you mean? And they knew something I didn't, which was that he had just been making a movie, Ong Bak, in Thailand. And it had been bought by, there were a lot of people involved with that film early. Luc Besson, who bought the rights, Steven Seagal, who wanted to buy the rights, and he was going to shoot a sequence where at the beginning, the end of the film, he was the teacher of Tony Jaa. That was something that was happening. Wow. And then after I heard about that, I flew to Thailand and did a deal. We bought the film. I'm trying to remember the time frame, but somehow I was involved. We got the film and it was distributed on a DVD label, Hong Kong Legends, even though it was a Thai film. But I mean, I think it was released on Hong Kong Legends, and we did a lot of bonus features. So I spent a lot of time in Thailand working on the bonus features. And, obviously I was blown away by the film. Sure. Spent time with Tony, with Pracha Pinkau, the director, with Pana Ritakrai, who was like his teacher and the choreographer of the film, and a lot of the other guys. And, was somebody who was an early white person on the scene. And I think Tony even remembered, hey, I met this guy with Jackie Chan way back when on the Medallion. So Ong Bak really was the most incredible calling card anybody could ask for as an action guy. And then they followed it up with Tom Yum Goong, which I was even more involved with because the studio that I worked for in America, we came in very early, bought the rights to the film, and then we did like a re-edit and re-scoring and redub of it as The Protector to go out in America. And this is like an early idea of the disconnect between the critics online and the real world. People were like, the fans were like, how dare you? You bastardized it. You put Mrs. music on there. You dubbed it into English. You did this, you did that. Meanwhile, the film was like, I think it got to number 7 or maybe number 4 in the American box office chart. No Thai film had ever been in the top 50.
No,
they had a parade for us, for the company in Bangkok with elephants and the prince.
Oh, wow.
Fireworks going off, dancing girls. Oh, it was insane. And online, this is terrible what they've done. You've offended the Thais. And I'm there looking at this dancing elephant going, you could have fooled me. So I remember at the big banquet for the film, the company that Tony Jaa made films for was Sahamagol. And they were the ones who had taken a gamble on making movies with him. Mm-hmm. And the head of Sahamagol was called Somsat. And he is actually an ethnically Chinese Thai, like many of the tycoons in Bangkok. And he had other business interests, but his big thing was that he had discovered Tony Jaa. So they were sitting there and he goes, so what do you guys want to do next? Let's collaborate. You've had this fantastic success releasing our film in America. What are we going to do for an encore? And we talked about doing Ong Bak 2. Mm-hmm. And a couple of things happened. We were so keen to snatch Tony Jaa off the market and have him do the first international film with us that we hurried through the contract and we missed a clause that came back to bite us. And that was, we never thought about it being an issue, but there was a guy working at Sahamagol, Gilbert Lim, who was actually Malaysian, but he spoke Thai. And I don't think he was the perfect person. Nice guy, amiable, lazy. And he was not somebody who understood, I think, the nature of the action movie. Action movies were not his thing, but he was a company whose stock in trade was action stuff. And he called me one day, or we met, and he said, well, Tony is breaking away from Pracha Pinkau, who directed his first 2 hit films. Yeah. And he's going to do the film himself. No problem. And we had an idea for an Ong Bak 2, which we could have had Tony as the director, no problem. And the idea was that the statue that you see in the first film, that's the MacGuffin for Ong Bak, is taken to be displayed in New York and then stolen. And Tony is paired with an American actor, and they have to go and get back I know it's not the most original film in human history, but it was like, and RZA was going to be in it, the guy from Wu-Tang Clan, who later did work on the rather disappointing Tom Yum-Goong 2, Protector 2. So anyway, but that was our plan, to do this. And we sat down, and I was all geared up to say, we've got these Hollywood writers, and we want to do this, and we're going to shoot there, and we'll shoot the exteriors in New York and all the interiors here, which they did for the Australian scenes in Tom Yum-Goong. And he says, no, Tony doesn't want to do that. He's broken away from Pracha, and he wants to do a historical epic. Ong Bak 2 will be a historical epic. And I think I just, it was like, producers, Springtime for Hitler. I'm like, what? And he goes, yeah, and it's going to be it's going to show you the history of the statue that we see in the first film. I said, okay, so this is like if Warner Brothers were going to do Lethal Weapon 2 with Mel Gibson. And he says, well, actually, it's called Braveheart. And it's actually...
yeah, it was a weird direction, man.
Those ridiculous things. And Gilbert, legally correctly, but sensibly, insanely, says in the contract, it nowhere says that Ong Bak 2 has to be a contemporary film. And so I believe that had a different person, and at some time around this period, Dear Somsak had a stroke and was incapacitated. So that also, and I'd probably have to, I'm not too sure the time frame, but these were elements that caused what should have happened not to happen. In the end, Tony made Ong Bak 2, and he spent so much money on it, it had to be split to be Ong Bak 2 and 3.
Yeah, sure.
And I think the films have merit, but I don't think they're held in the high regard that Ong Bak and Tom Yum-Goong are. And I think if we had had a free hand to do what they did with Jackie, what they did with Jet and Donnie, well, Donnie didn't need to, but the other people, he taught them English, presented them in a vehicle, partnered with an American lead. And you had all the bells and whistles of that, all the music, the hip hop music. You had all of the stuff that you had. People might be critical of that. Oh, we need to do a pure Thai movie. I don't think anybody felt Tony would stop doing Thai films, but we wanted Ong Bak 2 to be a truly international film that everybody could see. And that didn't happen. And I almost feel that subsequently, with the exception maybe of Skin Trade, which I think was really with him and Dolph Lundgren, which I think was really underrated. He hasn't had a vehicle where it's Tony Jaa and a Hollywood lead, or he's always been to the back of the pack.
Yeah.
And I think that happened because what went wrong was that there's a phenomenon that when you make it, everybody's your friend, and everybody tells you the guys that helped you make it, you don't really need them. You don't need this actor. You don't need this director. You don't need this. And Somsak, I think if Gilbert was a better action movie guy, and if Somsak had not had the stroke, and if Ong Bak 2, and we even said to them, he had another script which was called Man of a Thousand Poisons, or Master of a Thousand Poisons, which was about a young guy who's hired and trained in all the different martial arts around the world by this mysterious millionaire to enter a tournament at the end. And then he realizes that this guy's a bad guy, so he has this big fight at the end. We wanted to use Sammo Hung to play the guy who's hired him, and then they would have a big fight at the end. So a bit like later SPL with Donnie. And we said that, and I even said to them, I said, look, I don't want to get in the way of Tony Jaa, the artist. Suspend our contract. You guys can find money to do an Ong Bak 2 and 3, and go and do the film, and come back later, and we'll do Man of a Thousand Poisons. It doesn't have to be Ong Bak 2. We'll just call it something else.
Sure.
And to his shame, Gilbert was intractable. He was like, no, we have a contract for Ong Bak 2, and you have to honor it. And the fact that it's a historical piece is your stupidity because you didn't put a line in the contract saying it will be a contemporary film.
Sure.
It got worse because at the same time, they did a film with this girl, Jija, called Chocolate, which is one of the most awesome action films ever made. Quentin Tarantino had it as one of his top 10 films of the year it came out.
Wow.
And what we had done is which is a common practice, the film we really wanted was Ong Bak 2, which we were paying X. and then we were buying chocolate as part of the deal, and that was why. But we were paying a disproportionate amount of the Ong Bak 2 money to chocolate, but that was fine. And chocolate was an amazing film, but then that deal went away, and I almost feel Ji Jaa's career went away. And yeah, I mean, by the way, I don't want to completely, kind of like throw poor Gilbert under the bus. I think he's actually a nice guy, and he's actually been involved with the production distribution of some really nice art films or different kind of films. He was just totally the wrong guy. As much as Raymond Chow was the right guy to handle Bruce Lee, or like Raymond, Willie Chan was the best guy to manage Jackie Chan. There was nobody on the scene, and Gilbert should have been the guy sitting down with because he spoke English and he knew the market, saying to Tony, "This is what you need to do." But instead, and Tony himself, I don't really want to get into this, but he had some other issues, which were obvious, and I think he was not leading the charge. He was more reactive to what people were saying, and later reconciled with Pracha, Pracha had also directed Chocolate, and he basically gone, okay, I'm not going to work with Tony, I'll do a movie with Ji Jaa, and it was really, really awesome. I kind of felt not just Tony's career, but Thai action cinema kind of lost momentum after Chocolate, and there was nothing that really made you go, whoa. And what was missing for Tony? I mean, I think he's still working. He still does good. He still does impressive fight sequences, but he should have been on the level of a Jackie Chan or a Donnie Yen or an international Asian action lead. But he didn't have that. I mean, again, I also look back on, like I said, with White Tiger. In hindsight, even for my own maturity and development as a producer, or I probably think maybe if I would have I should have gone about things a little differently. Maybe I could have been more of an effective agent for change with him at that time. But it just felt like, oh my God, what? Cue the Plague of Frogs, Somsak, and then you're doing the period one, and then this is happening, and then that's happening, and you just felt like the odds suddenly were against Tony, and I think it was a shame. And I don't know that his career, as yet, has recovered. I was there for a lot of in the middle years of Donnie Yen until he finally hit with Yip Man. And in that time, I was told repeatedly, this guy won't make it. He's had his shot. Nobody wants him as a lead. And I was always convinced he did have what it took. And I also thought that he was just in search of the role that would define him.
Sure.
And maybe that will yet happen for Tony. But that's the true story. That's what really happened. And for better or worse, I was the guy that was there in the thick of it, back and forward to Thailand every week. But then with Gilbert, it was funny. I was back in Thailand. We did Shanghai, the movie there, with Gong Li and Chow Yun Fat and John Cusack. And Benny Akides was there.
Oh, okay.
He was training Cusack, and he was also training Gong Li at the hotel, and doing choreography on the film under my friend Vic Armstrong. But we were all there in Thailand for a long time, and we built this massive replica Shanghai at, I think it was Moonstar Studios. So I called up Gilbert at Salmogar and said, hey, we've got this great studios. When we finish with it, you can have it to make a movie. And he wouldn't come to visit. He wouldn't even come and meet Gong Li and Chow Yun Fat. He wanted to be in his air-conditioned office. And, it was disappointing. And I really, I look at people and I just go, come on, dude, step up. But in that instance, it didn't happen. But Tony Jaa, I got to say, I wish him nothing but well. And I feel it was a shame that opportunity was missed. But he may yet come back with a role that defines him as an actor. I mean, the funny thing is, I almost feel if you'd given Donnie Yen Yip Man to do 10 years earlier, it maybe wouldn't have been as successful. He needed to grow into the role.
It makes sense. The timing is very important.
It's like Clint Eastwood sat on the Unforgiven script because he knew he wasn't ready for it. He wasn't old enough to play the part as written, and he didn't want to change it. So he sat on that for like 10 years. And of course, they can go the other way. Poor Kirk Douglas, he bought One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And by the time they got it together, he was too old. And so it was Michael Douglas. So these things can go either way.
Yeah, they could go either way. Wow. I would have loved to seen your Ong Bak 2 movie. That would have been way more interesting and commercial. Yeah, that would have been a game changer for sure. There's no.
Well, yeah, I don't want to kind of attack the movies of Ong Bak 2 and 3, because I think they had merit and they had interesting action scenes in them. My own take, I thought that from the very beginning of that conception that you were going to force feed this to people. This is Ong Bak 2 because we say it is. It wasn't, it was not. People were not going to buy it, and I didn't from the get-go. But they were intractable, and so you were stuck with the situation you were in. And we eventually backed away from it, and kind of got out of the Tony Jaa business. Oh, I also sent you a bunch of pictures of another thing. After Chocolate came out, I was in Bangkok with your man Jean-Claude Van Damme, and I said, "Listen, you got to look at this movie." So I showed him Chocolate, which I think at that time, I don't even know if it had been released, but we were releasing it. So I had a copy of it, and our company was releasing it, potentially. And I showed it to him, and he was like, "Holy moly, this is great." Well, he didn't say that because he's French, or Belgian rather. So he said it in French, but anyway, the equivalent of "holy moly" or "sacre bleu." And then I invited Pracha, the director, to come over to his hotel, and we all had lunch and talked about doing a movie which would have been him with Jaa. And actually, I still have that idea in the back of my mind, and it's a script now called Forget Me Not. And I don't know if it would be Jean-Claude, but it could be another another European, let's say, martial arts action guy, maybe from the 80s, paired with a young, Chinese, in this case, street urchin fighting girl, which Jaa would have been if we could have made the film. And again, looking back on my own development as a producer, I'm like, why didn't we make that film? And to this day, I'm really not sure.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because you introduced Van Damme to that director Prechow, and so I guess there was a project in discussion.
Well, I think the other problem was that I was keen to do it with Jean-Claude and Jaa, and she was contracted to Sahamagol, and as I say, it was very difficult to negotiate with Sahamagol because of it sounds like I'm really trashing him, but I mean, it was just difficult at that time because it was hard to get Gilbert to commit to stuff. So that was the issue there. And I think if you look at the initial run of Sahamagol action stuff, it was at one level, and then for some reason it petered off. And then Panaritikrai passed away, rest his soul, a few years after that, who was like the action guy making all that stuff happen. He'd been doing these insane, cheap, stunt-filled Thai movies for a long time, using Tony as a stunt guy in them before that.
Yeah.
So that was the Tony Jaa story. What happened with Robin Shou after Mortal Kombat? I did a Robin Shou movie before that, Guns N' Roses, my first film.
Oh, really?
In Birmingham, England. Yes, I was a producer on that, and Robin came in, and the second or third day of shooting, he jumped off the roof of a hospital in the movie. He wasn't trying to. People do jump off buildings when they work.
Yeah, sure.
That was not that case, but he jumped off in character and broke his foot.
Ooh.
We had to shoot around that for the rest of it.
Jeez.
I don't know. Well, okay, I can just go on my personal experience. I had seen Robin. I did a film with Robin, obviously, and had seen him around and then in the industry, and saw him at Mortal Kombat and whatever, and Beverly Hills Ninja. To be really honest, for me personally, I never warmed to him in real life, for whatever reason. And I didn't think his characters were particularly. It's like people would write all kind of stuff about Jean-Claude Van Damme, but
Sure.
I know he's an idol of yours. But I can say, as somebody who's been his friend for many years and known him for a long time, that there's an innate goodness in the guy, who's an imperfect human like all of us. But there's this innate niceness and this, kind of illuminated spirit that comes across on film. And indeed, if you can, if you have time with him that manifests, you realize who he is as a person. And he's still this dear, sweet guy from Belgium. I really believe that. And I think that's why, through all its ups and downs, his career has sustained, because his fans are very patient with him and they see something there. And maybe it's not his fault, but with Robin, I never felt that, Jackie Chan had it. Jackie Chan has that sweetness in person and whatever. But no, I never much. I mean, I hate to, I love so many people. It sounds weird when I say I don't like somebody, but no, I never liked Robin, and I think the audience felt the same way. I'm sorry to be blunt, but it's that.
Hey man, like if that, yeah, I mean,
Like,
yeah, you know, he played
the audience felt the same way. Because, and
yeah,
again,
sure.
it's called show business. If by the way, if it's like, if I didn't like somebody and the audience, rest of the audience did, who cares? You know, he would have been in 10 more
Sure.
movies in starring roles, and everybody loves him. And I'm sitting there going, "Oh, just go to Guns N' Roses with me, you know, you grumpy bugger." Who cares what old Logs thinks? But I do think when you ask about people's careers who had a breakout early film or, you know, had success, it's one of two things. They are the architect of their own demise, like George Lazenby on A Majesty's Secret Service, or as with Tony Jaa, events conspire against them.
Yeah.
Or it can be a combination of the two. The optimum is if the audience warms to the person and they have a fantastic support network, a solid support network. I mean, honestly, you cannot underestimate the benefit to Jackie Chan of having Willie Chan as his manager. And then Leonard Ho, who's kind of a bit overshadowed by Raymond Chow, but Leonard Ho as his godfather at, don't mean godfather in a mafia term, godfather in a Kaye kind of Chinese relationship.
Yeah.
Those relationships really saw him through the first part of his career.
Yeah, it's always an interesting topic in discussion. It's like you have to have, obviously, you know, whatever actor needs the right character, but the way they, you know, embody that character with like their own personality, because as great as an actor anybody is, you're never going to get completely away from yourself. There's always going to be like, you're this person. There's certain things that you have just, you know, like what you mentioned about Van Damme. He has that, like, in every character he plays, even though a lot of his characters, some of them are very, very dark, some are more happy, you know, charismatic, but there's always, you could see the real Van Damme within each of these characters. And that's just something the audience has always been, you know, gravitated towards.
I worked with him on a film, and you know, it's very challenging making films, but the director and I were looking at a camera, just slowly pushing in on him. I think I told the story before. And it was so interesting because you so want to know what he's thinking. And you could put a 25-year-old, good-looking, younger guy and do the same camera move, and the audience is like, yeah, you know, looks like a male model, you know, great. But with him, there's just something going on. And you either have it or you don't. But I do think there are people. I mean, I'll give you an example. Somebody you've had on the show, Don Wilson.
Okay.
You know, Don is an innately nice man, a good person.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And he works like an MF, you know, which I think I talked about this some length before, the idea of people that I've never known anybody who really worked diligently and was a good person, had a modicum of talent, who completely failed. When Don succeeded, I mean, I shouldn't sell him short. He had a fantastic run of films. But I think it was down to, I don't know that he had that much innate talent as an actor. He just worked at it. He worked at his acting, went out and sold those films state by state, worked on the action sequences, worked on producing stuff, worked on his physique, worked on everything. And everybody comes away from him, including you, I think, going, Don Wilson's one of the nicest guys.
Well, you know what's so cool? So I thought that anyway, just from interviewing him, but because of this channel, I've been able to meet a lot of these people in person. So the cool thing is, like, I know people all around the world now. And like last time I was in California visiting my brother, it's like Don doesn't live that far. So we trained together.
I saw that.
Days.
I think that was so cool. Talk about like
the coolest thing ever. And then eating lunch together, just hanging out with them. And that's the thing that's been the most incredible with this channel, is just the friendships, the networking, the relationships I'm able to build. So
I used to see Don, like, I think a couple of years running, we saw him in Cannes, and he's just almost exhausting with his energy level. And he had his dragon wear. I think he had a t-shirt line, and he gave me a t-shirt or whatever, but always a joy to be around. And I do think, as you very correctly say, that joy of life, it kind of, the joie de vivre, it kind of, you can see it on the screen, and that's the guy audiences want to see. And there are other people who have a really impressive debut or a great showcase, and you never see them again. And I think the problem is either with them, or they were really, really unlucky. And, you know, I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, I'm not sure which is true in this case, but you look at Timac with The Last Dragon, where you think, how did that guy never do another film? It just boggles the mind.
Audiences loved him.
I saw the interviews where he talked about it. It still, for me, didn't completely make sense why he never. I actually almost worked on a film with him. It was called Black Ninja, and I think he had shot some stuff for it in New York, and I was with Toby Russell, the son of Ken Russell, in Taiwan, preparing to do Black Ninja with Timac. And then the money fell through. But that would have been a low-budget indie film.
Okay.
I would have thought after Last Dragon, he could have, at some stage, found something else to do. But that was a mystery. So there are people like that where they have the most incredible debut opening round in film history, and then you don't see them again.
Yeah, it's crazy. You know, they're still talking about The Last Dragon Part 2. It's a real discussion, man. Like, I know I don't know if the writer Louis Finosta, I think that's his name, if he finished it or not, but he tweeted like last year, was kind of hinting, hey, we got something going, and you know, Timac wasn't excited. I don't know if they really got much info out, but they've been talking.
He looks amazing. I mean, Timac looks incredible.
Yeah,
I mean,
he's aged really well.
So. I mean, I don't know what the idea is if you bring in a new, like the next Last Dragon, and that's a younger dude, and he becomes the mentor, or is it he's kind of retired from the world and he has to come back for some reason and, you know, reclaim his lost honor. And the other concern I would have, particularly with that film and even something like Big Trouble in Little China, is if the components of it are all pretty generic. It was the tone. The tone of the film was so unique. And I would have a question in my mind of how you can recapture it. And I say this is the guy that made Crouching Tiger 2. And I fully admit did not capture the tone of Crouching Tiger 1 before you guys all write in. But that was a good learning experience for me. That beyond the story and the characters and bringing back the actors and, you know, the fan references and everything, it's like the tone. So I wonder, in the modern cynical world, can you really recapture the innocent? Because what I loved about that film, Last Dragon, was the innocence of it.
Sure. Yeah.
Even though it had great martial arts fights and it was fun, it was a very innocent, bright movie. And I wonder, how do you do that again today? But if the phone rang and somebody said, "Hey, Mr. Logan, could you work on Last Dragon too?" I'd give it a shot. But I'd be curious to see how that turned out.
Yeah, because the world is very cynical now. Because even Bloodsport had the innocence to it, at least the Van Damme character, even though it was like
absolutely
people died, but it was like it was very interesting. You know?
Well, and it's interesting because I later people, and the same thing, we did a screening of Enter the Dragon at my kung fu school in like the library room at the end of our gathering, and I did like a live commentary for it. But it was interesting because it had not dated at all, and I have constantly read people say, well, despite the fact that his first film was the shoddy Bloodsport, Jean-Claude became a star, and you know, everything was shoddy about Enter the Dragon, except no, it wasn't. They were everything about those films. I mean, it's like and what was interesting is how ineptly everybody copied them, including the Bloodsport sequels with dear Daniel Bernhardt, who's a lovely guy, but you know, they didn't really deliver. But there's the scene like when he's with Roy Chow in Yuen Long, in actually the same tree where Jackie Chan fights Yun Siu Tin in Drunken Master, is where Jean-Claude trains with Roy Chow at the end of the training sequence in Bloodsport. And they get that wonderful shot, the crane shot where the camera comes back when he gives him the sword. Yeah. And you get that wonderful Paul Herzog, those wonderful beats of music on the thing. You never saw that in another martial arts picture of that era. So many beautiful touches. Enter the Dragon just went after Bruce Lee kills O'Hara, and he does a slow motion glide across, and the energy and the audience. Every time I've shown that clip, including, well, the whole film, but showing that clip, the audience have been like, it's just so powerful. And I just wonder if, I think there's a problem today that films are judged not as films, but as clips. That somebody researching an article goes, oh, yeah, you did this movie, go on to YouTube. Yeah, okay. 3 minutes later, they go, oh, it was cheap, or whatever, you know, and then that was that. And I look at those films, and definitely there are guilty pleasure films that I see from that era, and probably you're the same, where you can see the flaws of them, but they have a certain, again, a style or a character. Cyborg, right? I mean, I watched that with Sean the other day, and the flaws in it are evident. But there's so much to enjoy about that film. The visual style of Albert Pyun, the soundtrack. I mean, when the boat moves on the water and there's got that synth music, it's a lot of stuff there. You go, wow, you know, it's not quite, but the sense and the feel of it is so special and different. And, you know, you could line up 10 other exploitation martial arts action films from the era, and 9 of them are of a certain level, and then you have a Cyborg or a Bloodsport or whatever.
Cyborg divides the people the most, in my opinion.
Yeah,
it's a love it or hate it film, and I've always loved it. But like you said, you could very easily see all the mistakes and everything else. But there's just something.
It actually plays like amazing dailies from a film that was never quite finished, because all of the visual imagery, like the wedding cake burning in the camp, the crucifixion, the JC being crucified, the crucifixion scene. I mean, it's interesting because I think Albert Pyun was not a great storyteller, but he had an innate sense of spectacle. And none of us can witness the crucifixion and not have some reaction to it.
Sure.
The flashback scenes when he has the hands on the barbed wire. I mean, it was just, there's so much to look at and go, this is so interesting, this is so interesting. And then there are things that don't really make sense, that don't really work. But at the same time, when I watched it, you're compelled to keep watching it. And I saw it through my younger son's eyes, and he was just going, oh, that's interesting. That doesn't make sense. But, oh, that's beautiful. And I would be commenting and saying, I love the music. I like this imagery and what have you. But the fact that we're still talking about the movie tells you something. Because if you go back that year, there are a bunch of other, I'm not talking about the A-list movies, but there are a bunch of other B pictures.
Sure.
We would have to search up and say, what came out that year? So that was my 10 cents on Cyborg.
Here's a question, because you were talking about, you know, if we can even capture the tone of these certain films. So you haven't directed a film yourself, have you?
I have, to my sins. I don't think I've ghost directed scenes on films. I directed a whole film called The Dark Soul, and I started directing another film which we didn't finish. The detail work of directing is not my forte. I'm glad I had the experience. And I did Dark Soul at a time in life when I was like, okay, I really want to just work and work and work and work. And so I was like Jim Carrey in The Yes Man. You want to direct a movie? Yes. You want to star in a movie? Yes. You know, I was just like, let's do it. And so that I don't in any way, I'm blessed that I had the experience, but you know, I don't think it was like a bunch of great shots in search of a movie. And I lie awake at night redirecting it.
Oh, okay.
By the way, another movie from that era that I think is fantastic and so underrated Albert Pyun film is the first Nemesis with Olivia Gruner.
Gruner. Sure.
I know how recently you've seen that. That visually stands up really well. There's some incredible.
People speak highly of that. They do. I might have seen it in the 90s or something. I don't really remember, to be honest. I gotta watch it like with fresh eyes now in 2023. Definitely. Hey, here's a question. Will you be doing an audio commentary of the Mandarin cut of Big Boss?
I would happily do commentary. Anybody asked me to do a commentary, I would. The only issue with the commentaries is, I mean, that I don't own the rights to the film. So the company that was releasing the film would have to say to me, hey, babe, would you like to come and do a commentary? And there are other people doing them now, and I almost feel like I did my stint at it, and probably for different reasons, it's time for me to leave the stage and let those guys do commentaries, and I'll enjoy listening to them and watching them, and I'll do other stuff. I have to say, as I look at the road ahead, I'm continuing to do, since I moved to Hong Kong, I've done a film a year, 2 films a year. I would continue to do a film a year if I'm allowed, if it's possible, but more towards writing more books and doing more documentary projects, and forming a publishing company now, and doing more events to promote Chinese traditional martial culture. And I don't have the same. I mean, there's definitely a role to be like the Howard Stern of kung fu movies, and to be constantly interviewed, constantly be doing that. But there were a couple of things with it. One, didn't really. It's a lot of work with very limited return. And the other thing is, I always kind of felt I was repeating myself, because I've done commentaries for all these films before. And I researched them in great detail. So those commentaries are out there. So it's not a focus of mine, but people can find me, and I'm very open to. And if people come to visit in Hong Kong, I'm always delighted to meet them and talk about film and talk about, have them as guests at my hidden fortress. But I don't have any immediate plans and to do more commentaries and stuff. I think the book. Well, the thing is, I think there's like at least 8, 9 guys out there. Actually, Michael Worth and Frank Zheng are the best of these two guys. But there are people doing commentaries. But in terms of writing books about Hong Kong film, and I'm working on my big epic book about Jackie Chan at the moment, Jackie Chan and I, which Bruce Lee made, let's say 5 films. And so that was Bruce Lee and I, which is like that. Jackie made 100 films. So imagine. But anyway, I'm getting there.
A multi-volume set.
I'm wondering about that too. It's been mentioned. And anyway,
for each decade.
Beginning of his career to Drunken Master 2, because thereafter I feel that parts of the films were good, but I think it's interesting because I think that there's the same thing, that period of time, then all the golden era, like the Police Stories and the Project A's and Operation Condor, all those movies, and Armor of God, there was a certain family unit in place around Jackie. Willie Chan was alive and functioning. Leonard Ho was alive as the producer. Chua Lam, you had the first generation Jackie Chan stunt team. And I think that was the golden era. And Jackie's done good work since then, and obviously had hits since then. But I was just focusing on from the beginning of his solo career, filmmaking career, to Drunken Master 2. Because I think Drunken Master 2 was the last. Even Rumble in the Bronx, to me, it's the what is it? The parts are greater than the sum of the whole, or whatever. The bits of it work really, really well. But Drunken Master 2, I could watch the whole thing start to finish. Which, by the way, that is an amazing film that it worked because it was such chaos for it to be made. It was such a difficult film to make for Jackie, but it stands up really well.
Yeah, Rumble in the Bronx was the one that most people in America
broke him in there. Yeah, I mean, okay. My big thing was like, I know and did really, really well, but I'm like, oh man, you had to end it with a what was it? They had a hovercraft chase, and I was like, I'm so old school. I want him to fight some dude, I want him to find somebody and Jackie have an end fight. But they'd moved on from that, and even the Rush Hours, which have been fantastically successful, they move away from that end fight between Jackie and a guy, right? Mm-hmm. Imagine back in the day when Jean-Claude was in Hong Kong trying to get a gig, if Jackie would have signed him up to do an end fight. That would have been interesting, wouldn't it?
That would have been something. Hey, one last one here.
What happened to Jason Scott Lee?
Yes, Jason Scott Lee.
Jason, it's a funny story because I worked with him on Crouching Tiger 2, and he had done, of course, he did Dragon the Bruce Lee story, and then because I worked with him, I had the chance to talk to him for many hours, and he said, in retrospect, he made the same bad decision that Brandon did. It was like, I did the Bruce Lee thing. I don't want to do any more action stuff. Like, for example, right after Dragon, they were trying to put together Green Hornet with George Clooney as the Green Hornet and Jason as Kato. And he just turned it down flat because he said, I already did that. Yeah, and in retrospect, he said he should have done a couple of action things. Mm-hmm. But instead he did challenging films. He did like Rapa Nui, Map of the Human Heart, Jungle Book, but nothing that really.
He did Time Cop 2, the straight
sometime after. Yeah, basically he retreated to Hawaii. He was very early involved in environmental projects where he would go into inner city communities and they would green the schools and the environment. And it's really funny because sometime after that, somebody said to me, what happened to Jason Scott Lee? And I said, I actually wonder what happened to us. Because when I look at his life and the way he was living his life day by day and really living his best life and maybe not being a Hollywood A-list superstar, but day by day really doing something rewarding for him that helped the world, you almost think, maybe, it's like, who's actually got this figured out? And he would occasionally come out and do a film. And the story with Crouching Tiger was I was flying through Singapore because I think we were planning, myself and the director, Yin Mo Ping, were going to go to Scout in Malaysia. And we're in Singapore. And I had one friend, well, a friend. I had more than one. I have I have more than one friend in the world and more than one friend in Singapore. So I called him Jimmy Tanaka, who's an actor, and I said he was actually in Showdown Little Tokyo with Brandon Lee. So I called up Jimmy and said, hey, I'm in town with you. And I actually thought about introducing him to Yuen Woo-ping. And then he goes, hey, you'll never guess who's here. Jason Scott Lee. Because I think Jason's wife is Singaporean. And I said, and he said, but he's flying out in a couple of hours. I said, no, get him to this hotel. He's got to meet Yuen Woo-ping. He should be the villain in Crouching Tiger 2. And it was like that. And then he just showed up, and he looked like he's incredible. He looked like he could shoot pickup shots for Dragon, even though it was all those years ago. So Yuen Woo-ping just says, well, I said, yes. And then we had some other issues because he was committed to do The King and I in the musical in Melbourne. And so I don't know how we finessed that. I mean, I guess statute of limitations is out, so we're probably okay. We got him out of that anyway. And then he came to New Zealand, and it was wonderful having him in the movie. I mean, he was great, physically great. And I almost feel, I was talking in the past about maybe there's a third option. One is people have an impressive debut and people don't, but they're unlikable. Second is that they don't have a good team and events conspire against them, even though they have great potential. Third is maybe somebody who faces what it would take to become a superstar and decides not to do it. And I think Jason, maybe he'll hear this and be mad at me, but I think Jason maybe falls into that category, that in the wake of Dragon, it was like, do you want to do Green Hornet? Do you want to do Kung Fu movies? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And he wasn't going to pay that price. And after a while of doing interesting films, I think his feeling was, well, I'm just going to devote life to the things that give me pleasure. And if Hollywood will not accept me on my terms, I'll just take a step back. So maybe a third path is somebody who sees what they would be required to become to succeed in that way and chooses not to. Have you seen the documentary Searching for the Sugar Man?
I have not.
It's basically about this folk rock guitarist who vanished after 2 failed albums. And the rumors were that he'd shot himself on stage, set himself on fire, been killed by a jealous fan. And his albums became fantastically successful in apartheid South Africa. So he had a huge following in South Africa. And they would look at the albums and try to decide. And I mean, it's a spoiler alert, but halfway through the documentary, we find out, having been told that he's dead, that he's alive, and had no idea that he was a superstar in South Africa. And then they fly him there and they have concerts and everything. But they're interviewing one of his daughters, and the interviewer says, do you feel that he was cheated out of a career as a superstar by the fact that he became like a laborer? He was carrying fridges upstairs, he was renovating apartments. And she said something really interesting. She said that he did not have the obvious rewards that the rock star life would have given him, but the labor, the work, the life he had now provided a deeper reward in him that was not as visible, but nonetheless valuable. And I found that really touching and interesting observation of somebody who could have chosen another path or could have been on another path, but and I think Jason's in that category of somebody where they live life day by day on their own terms, and there's an integrity and satisfaction in doing that, right? So yeah, you should look at the documentary. It was a really great documentary. I loved it.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
And the Sugar Man. Oh, you can check.
That third option you mentioned about Jason Scott Lee is very interesting because I think people just in general have that narrow way they view things, and myself included, and just assume like, okay, this guy had that huge debut. He could have been a big star. And then he didn't become a household name per se. So you just then he failed in some way, but it's like, not really, because that's probably not even what he wanted to do. So for himself, he, the general audience might think that he's a failure as far as Hollywood and stardom goes, but in his own life, if he's content and happy, it's
I think so. And I think that there is I agree with you. I think there's a big, and I actually, can reflect this in my own experience, which is you hear about people saying stuff and, kind of critical, and you think, but the fact is, none of us actually live online. We haven't got the William Gibson world yet. We live our lives day by day. And the fact is, there's a perception online of people saying, understandably, whatever happened to Jason Lee, Jason Scott Lee, yada, yada, he failed, he disappeared, whatever. But Jason's living his life, I can tell you, day by day, hugely rewarding. I'm the same. There's frustrations and challenges and things have happened in my life. And people say, oh, whatever they want to say. But none of that matters. What matters is I wake up every day and enormously rewarded by the life I lead now. I think it's a life I deserve. And, if anybody could live my life, they would enjoy it. It's like yours, all the dreams of my youth came to fruition. A couple of nightmares as well, but that's, this is samsara. This is the life that we lead in now. But the fact is, people, I think, really buy into the idea that you're defined by what people are saying on Twitter. And I just look at that and think it's completely no. Like, we have a film market in Hong Kong. And I'm not sure why, but in the time that I've lived here, there haven't really been many white people making films. I think probably I'm the only one. So I would be at Film Mart dealing with somebody in front of me about making a movie. And then in the wings, there might be somebody else muttering or whatever's going on with them. But that's how I look at the internet. It's just voices off. Now, my life is what's immediately in front of me. Whether it's my children, whether it's training, whether it's a book I'm writing, whether it's something I'm watching and listening to and experience, that's my life. And if you allow yourself to be too distracted by all the, chitter chatter, of course you can never be happy. I've actually had conversations with people and they've said, I said to them, you can't, you're giving too much credence and too much emphasis to these platforms and wanting everybody to love you and wanting everybody to say good things about you. And Jason's a good example of somebody who's not in the least bitter or resentful, but he's just made a choice about how he wants to live life. I mean, and by the way, we should all look like Jason, right? I remember when he did Mulan and they did some press because he was in that movie as well.
Somewhat recently, yeah, sure.
Yeah, it was also, it's funny because we did Crouching Tiger with him and Donnie in New Zealand. And then Mulan went back to New Zealand. So... that was kind of, I don't know, New Zealand must have been the place. It was a great place to film. Have you been to New Zealand?
Have I been there?
Yeah.
No, I would love to go there someday.
It is great. I mean, it's a great place to shoot films, but I think it's a great place to go to. Alexander Fuseng. Okay. I mean, it's interesting and it's a sad reality that he was like a Kung Fu James Dean and he was a huge action star in his day. And, he was like a prototype Jackie Chan with the big mane of hair and the big nose and athleticism. Unusually, he came from a rich family. Most Kung Fu stars do not. And he died young, and it was in a car accident, and it was a big tragic event. And I would say in Hong Kong today, I want to say nobody remembers him. I mean,
I've never even heard of the guy.
Right. You and most of Hong Kong, sadly. And he's just totally been forgotten. If you're a devotee of Shaw Brothers films, and there's actually a book about him by Tico Harrison, which is good. I think it's called The Chinatown Kid. But there's no book about him that I know of in Chinese. And if you said Fuseng to people in Hong Kong, most under the age of 40, they'd look at you blankly. So it just shows you how sic semper gloria mundi, so always the glory of the world. But for me, I look at that guy. I mean, he was somebody, when they did Snake and the Eagle Shadow, the first film that made Jackie a star, they kind of they would like to have used Fuseng and as the master, an actor called Ku Feng, but they were both under contract to Shaw Brothers, and it was really difficult to get them out. So then it was like, okay, then we're going to have to use other people. And then they went, okay, we'll use this guy, Jackie, which is a story unto itself. But the image was, who is there who's like Fuseng? So Jackie was like, now they have these kind of Bruce Lee lookalikes, and it's become a big thing. Like Michael did. Sure. So fun, so much fun. Jackie was almost like a Fuseng-alike, because they wanted somebody like that, and say, okay, we'll get a guy who looks a bit like him with shaggy hair and broad face and ha ha he he and whatever. And that was Jackie's breakout role. But he was very much in the shadow of Fuseng. And Fuseng did his last film, the 8 Diagram Pole Fighter, and then died in this car accident, and yeah, it was like a Kung Fu James Dean. But yeah, it was. I was greatly surprised that he, in this one generation, was as forgotten as he has been. I think it's a real shame. He was a real talent, and anybody who's now again, a lot of these companies are re-releasing on Blu-ray wonderful editions of these classic films. So there's no excuse. You can actually go out and get them and see Fu Xing in his great movies, and appreciate what a fantastic martial arts performer he was. And I almost want to feel, I don't know, there are films where I think Avenging Eagle or something where he does a good job as an actor. But let me talk about Avenging Eagle. It's really funny. It was when I was at an American studio, we had a great interest in acquiring and remaking different martial arts films. And Quentin Tarantino was going to do a remake of Avenging Eagle, if I remember correctly. And we were at the company's party at American Film Market, and I met Quentin, and he said, because knowing me to be the Hong Kong movie guy, he was like, yeah, I'm going to do Avenging Eagle, and I'm going to do 2 versions. One version will be in Chinese. The other version will be dubbed badly, intentionally, into English. And I'm going to get all the guys who are still alive, the guy that did the dubbing for those movies. All right, we'll do them now, you bastard. So he was going to get those guys and have them dub his movie intentionally badly. And then he acted out the opening scene. And that was all anyone's ever seen of Avenging Eagle by Tarantino. I wish I had a phone that shot video,
Yeah.
That was all anybody's seen. I don't think there was even a script. Yeah. So that was it. And I don't know what happened. Obviously now he's doing his 10th film, and I don't think it's Avenging Eagle. So
yeah, probably not.
It came by and by. Oh, it's funny because I've never heard, I mean, I swear to you that was happening. I've never heard that mentioned in an article or anything. So another scoop for you. Bey Logan, can do if you have Mortal Kombat Conquest and you playing it. I don't know what that's about. Sorry. Mortal Kombat. Michael Worth. Yeah, Michael was great. I mean, do you remember the PM Entertainment films?
I remember Michael Worth in that Lorenzo Lamas movie with Jeff Langton. What was that called?
I used a bunch of them. He always used to wear Otomix. I don't know if you know that label.
Yeah, I had those shoes. I used to wear those in the gym.
And they had kind of like Stars and Stripes pants, loose pants.
Yeah.
Alan. Alan is a martial arts star. I mean, I did a movie with him, Kickbox Retaliation, and I work with him again in a minute. I think he's really super talented, nice man, and you know what? I think the problem with Kickbox Retaliation, I can talk about to some degree it's my own film, so I can criticize it a little bit. And I had this conversation with Dimitri, the director. I said, you know what? It's kind of like you look at the label on the box and it says Kickbox Retaliation. They know what the movie is going to be. We have to find a way to, I mean, we know it's going to have slam bang action. We know you're going to have an end fight with a Tong Po lookalike, which we had all of that. But we have to find ways to kind of twist it and change it. And we had an ongoing struggle. And if I had any contribution on that movie, it was to say to Dimitri, why are we doing it so head on? Can we do it obliquely? And I think with Alan, it's not his fault, but the directors he worked with want him to be so head on that you just be the conventional, good looking, high kicking martial arts hero. We've already had that. So I think he has a lot of potential, but it's not, again, maybe I should call him. It's not down to purely, you can't blame him. It's the directors and the producers and the writers dealing with him and going, hey, Alan, we're going to do this, and this is going to be different. I mean, I'll give you an example. It's like I had a picture I was going to do. We didn't do it in the end, but it was based on a cult comic book called The Badger, where he was a superhero with multiple personality disorder. So whereas, Spider-Man is Peter Parker and, Captain America is Steve Rogers, the Badger is a bunch of people. So for example, if you had Alain Moussi as a martial arts character, fighting character with multiple personality disorder, immediately Alain gets to really go crazy with different roles.
Sure.
And you come away going, wow, this guy's an amazing actor. And he could do it. But when you just say, okay, play this sweet, straight arrow guy, which is a version of what Alain is. He's the nicest person. He's a super sweet man. And I wish him nothing but well. But the cure, if it's needed for that, is somebody needs to take a run at him and go, let's do something different and interesting. Same with Scott, we talked about. I think Scott has great potential.
Him and John Wick 4 completely taken on a different character, even physically. The look
that was great. But I
great.
almost feel. I mean, mind you, he did Avengement when he had the teeth and everything. He's really stretching. He's really trying. I had a chat with him not so long ago because I think one of the great blessings of my life. I was so proud that I had some role in the early
Medallion.
On the Medallion. That was quite but for a film that everybody hated, it kind of did bring some people together. But Scott was on that. But I'm interested now and happy to see him expanding as an actor, because I think surely there are a finite number of films you can do playing a straight arrow, unchallenged character figure. I mean, that was one interesting thing in Enter the Dragon, because I was watching it again the other day, and some of the people that had never seen it before. What's interesting is the subtext of that film is that Bruce Lee's a Buddhist monk who kind of gets forced to go and kill people, and actually doesn't really enjoy it, because if you look at after he's killed the guy who's murdered his or caused the death of his sister, there's that great leap in the air, and he comes down, and all those emotions on his face. You can't imagine another actor in the world doing that and pulling it off. Only Bruce Lee. But at the same time, it was this, there was a texture there to the character. It wasn't just kung fu robot guy. And I think that there's a laziness, a shorthand. I know it seems to be my recurring theme on today's podcast, but I mean, if there's one human attribute, because life is so short, time is so precious. When I see people being lazy, it just annoys me, because I see my own. I'm in the last section of my life, Sure. I see time running out, and I'm like going, God, man, we really need to, we need to make the best of it. Like we need to work while it is day. So I see people being lazy. People trying their best and failing is the saddest thing. People too lazy to get off go. I had an actress we worked with a couple of pictures with, and she had so much potential physically. She was like a kung fu fighting Angelina Jolie, and I just felt, I looked at her, and she just didn't have that, drive. Like Maggie Q, who I work with. I remember we had a meeting one time, and I said, I think she went off from the table, the restroom or somewhere. And the guy said, so what's special about her? There's so many pretty girls. I said, you know what? If you said to her, for this film to be successful and creatively fulfilling, you got to run now and dive in Hong Kong Harbor. You just hear the sound of feet. She would just do it. Really? Because she's that committed. And that's why she's got, even now, I just saw her being interviewed the other day. She's doing another picture. She did a bunch of movies in Hong Kong. And then she did kind of relatively thankless roles in Mission Impossible and Die Hard. And then my favorite, Balls of Fury. And then Nikita. And I thought, oh, Nikita, maybe that's it. You do a few seasons on TV, and then maybe you marry and whatever. But then she's back doing Protégé and these other films. And then she's got this new picture just coming out now. I'm so proud of her, because obviously we worked together very closely in her Hong Kong years. But that was the thing, was the drive, that relentless drive, as you have. This is not an easy gig, and you're training like a beast, and you're doing films like Last Kumite. So that I always look at people doing, if somebody's really going for it. I always say to everybody's younger than me now, I always say, like if you're doing. You may do the wrong thing, but there's a chance you might do the right thing. If you're just stuck at neutral, then nothing's going to happen.
And I'm giving myself chances to do the right thing. So, we'll see how Last Kumite turns out. See how Warrior Island turns out. After that, I'm doing a Rene Perez film where I play like a hitman. Yeah, I'm the lead in that one. So
great.
That's going to be.
When's that going to shoot? Where is that going to film?
In Northern California.
Okay.
So
California is great because you got great light every day. It's a really good place.
Yeah. A lot of it will be outdoors. Actually, it's a prison transport gone wrong type movie. The funny history behind that is Renee was going to make that with Donnie Yen like 15 or 20 years ago, but then Donnie Yen got too expensive.
What was it called? The title?
Well, I'll tell you the title later because
Okay.
it was like a working title.
No. The only reason I was asking is
like
because I was trying to remember, because I was around Donnie for all those international films way back in the day, and you know, it's interesting you say that, but the system around him, even including, I got him some international gigs like Highlander Endgame and Puma TV series, but yeah, I still think there was stuff that he should have done or should still do, like the Sleeping Dogs video game, where he needs he doesn't necessarily always have the best structure around for the international stuff. I think he could have done more interesting international roles, but then maybe it's good he held out, because John Wick was so incredible for him.
Oh,
Maybe it's
yeah,
better
that
to do
was
that.
wow. He stole the show. I mean, everybody did great in the latest
Yeah.
John Wick. You know, of course,
Oh, yeah.
but it was really the Donnie Yen's character that impressed me the most. You know,
Well, what amazed me was like the idea, because I remember when I saw the first Sapolong, Killzone, the movie that has Samo fighting Donnie, and I saw how beat for beat they kind of replicated the same color suit, the same lighting behind Scott. I thought that was just wonderful, that, you know, the idea of somebody being that loved SPL that much, that they kind of replicated that whole character for Scott to play in the fat suit. But I thought he did a really fantastic job, and very game. I like people that go for it. You know, you could see somebody going, "Oh, I don't want to do that in a fat suit," you know. But he did it, and it was wonderful. And then he was on TV presenting it, and of course he's so good looking and, you know, fit and everything. He was like, "Wait a minute, where's the fat guy?"
Yeah, that's funny. Hey, circling back real quick to Alon Masai, because you really only have seen him work with Dimitri, like on the 2 Kickboxer films. They've been talking about the third one forever, and then he had a role in Jiu-Jitsu.
Jiu-Jitsu, yeah.
Does like, is he even trying to do stuff outside of Dimitri? Because I've talked to Dimitri before, and he speaks obviously very highly of Alon, but I wonder if he's even trying to do something outside of what Dimitri does.
Well, I mean, if you're an actor, it's great if you have an actor and you have your own production company to develop projects for you, but that's a minority. So, I mean, if you're an actor like Alon is, I think you are dependent on other people coming in. I do know he had a which is a good thing for a young actor. He had a contract with Dimitri for a bunch of movies. Then there's a movie called Flying Shadow that they wanted to do with Donnie Yen in China, and then there was Kickboxer, whatever the third one was going to be called, Armageddon, I think. And then let me think. Yeah, they had other projects they were going to do. And then they did Jiu-Jitsu, which was like, you know, such a freak fest. I enjoyed the fights, and Tony Jaa is in there as well, right? But it's fun. Nick Cage. Oh, you can't go wrong with Nick Cage.
No,
but you know, I think Alon is like, as I say, you kind of need somebody to go, hey, you know what? This would be an interesting role for somebody to do, where there's an expectation, and then you kind of twist the expectation a bit. But that would be in the hands of a writer and producer. You know, you need like a entry-level Quentin Tarantino who goes, hey, you know what? We're going to find, like, I'm working with Matthias on something at the moment with that idea in mind, that you kind of not quite.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, you kind of mentioned you guys are going to be doing
still early days, but I mean, it's like to do something, but not as. And I love the idea of doing something that is so obviously retro, and it's kind of referencing it. But, you know, to take an act, like more of the Tarantino thing, where you take an actor who's known for something, or, you know, known within the, you know, the cognoscenti, and you twist that character a bit. And I think Alon would be great for that. But I think it's hard because somebody has to approach him. So maybe me one day, I don't know. But I mean, he was a joy to work with, and he's the nicest person. And, you know, he has a great life in Canada. Don't cry particularly for Alon. He's doing fine. Huang Jan Li, I think he just. I do think I actually remember talking to John Chang, who was another kung fu movie star in films like Snake and the Monkey Shadow, and then became a key member of Jackie's team. And he's the guy that Jason Scott Lee fights twice in Dragon. And he now has a furniture store up at Wenzhou. Is it? It's up from, I'm trying to remember the place now, but it's up from Hong Kong in China. And I went to visit him and interview him for a book I'm working on. And he just said, you got no idea of the wear and tear of just doing, when it was the glory days of Hong Kong film, and you used to film after film after film, and end fight after end fight. Physical wear and tear of every day getting up, and that's all you did. Take after take of being slammed and kicking and punching and going home like, oh, you know, yeah, it's a dream, right? Oh, I want to be an action star, but you know, fame costs, and right here's where you start paying. So I think with Wang Jianli, he just had done so many of these things. I mean, right after Snake and the Eagle Shadow, it was interesting because how quickly after Snake and the Shadow, Drunken Master, Jackie Chan moved away from slapstick kung fu comedy, stylized kung fu comedy. I mean, he did like one more picture, Fearless Hyena, and then, you know, even by Dragon Lord, he's moving, Young Master Dragon Lord, he's moving away from that because everybody else was doing it. And then he famously said, if everybody else is drunk, I must be sober. And then you get Project A and you get Police Story and all that stuff. But Yun Siu Tin, who'd been the Drunken Master, he suddenly was film after film after film after film, and then died shortly from exhaustion, I think. And then Wang Jianli, everybody wanted him. Everybody wanted him to be the bad guy in their movies. So it was like working. I think there were two things. I mean, the period kung fu boom petered out, which is what he was for. And you see him in a few contemporary pictures like Where's Officer Tuba and things like that. And I think he just wanted to do other businesses in Korea and not get up and fight every day. And I can understand that, you know, and he definitely paid his dues. So I think that was the reason.
Yeah, you get burnt out and it would get old after a while. Yeah, it makes sense.
What I think of Warrior, you know, it's funny, Lewis, his dad, Phil Tan is an old friend of mine. I think he's the first person I knew, one of the first people I knew in the business in England. But I've seen Warrior and I think it's amazing. I think it's, first of all, I think the fact that they can do such a show with such integrity as a drama piece, which is almost entirely cast with Asian Pacific actors, and that they were shooting in South Africa for 2 seasons. I think, are they still there now? I think they were. And they recreated San Francisco and they made that whole thing. It was just great. I mean, it was very well executed, but just the vision and the persistence of it. And, you know, hats off to Shannon Lee and everybody taking something from Bruce Lee's, archive and turning it into this show. And then after 2 seasons, it was going to die, but no, then they moved it over to another network. So you look at that, and I just thought it was fantastic. In fact, one of the girls who's in it, we looked at, I'm going to mess her name up, Ayumbi, I think. She's South African, really good stunt person, and we wanted to use her in Furies. But she was committed, I think she was committed to a live show and then another series of Warrior. So we didn't in the end. But I remember talking to her about it, and I think it's great show. Michael Jai White, I'm guessing, is MJW.
Yes.
You know what? This is a really good question. I met Michael years ago in LA. He was trying to put a film together called The Moor, which he wanted to do in China. And I wanted to do a film with him, which I still have a good script for, which was called Harlem Goes East. And it was about a Black American cop who finds out he's half Chinese and goes to China to claim his legacy. And we didn't make either one. I don't know why. And because he did stuff like Black Dynamite, which is so good. I don't know. I mean, he's still consistently making films. I think he directed Never Back Down 2. And
I think maybe 2 and 3. I think he might have.
Very capable director, and as an actor, even this very powerful physical presence, physicality. He's an actor of great sensitivity. I've chatted with him and his wife online a few times. I got this habit where I don't always like to maintain. I'm not a great. How do I put it? I don't like writing back and forth, but I don't spend. I'm writing my books, writing my scripts, doing my own thing. So I'm not a great chatter back and forward. But if I see a film that impresses me, I would write to the person who did it. And I've done that a couple of times with Michael and his wife, where I saw something they worked on together and I thought, oh, that's great, or like his work. But I mean, how do we define bigger? I mean, he's
like probably a guy who goes to the theater like Jason Statham. Like Scott Adkins and Michael Jai White, they own the martial arts straight to video world, but they didn't get to like the Stathams with the bigger budgets, the bigger action films, and in the cinemas.
I think it's like a catch-22. It's like you didn't get cast in a film that broke out theatrically, and therefore, why are you not a theatrical actor? And it's kind of a roll of the dice, because I can see a reality that had Jason Statham not been offered the Transporter and it had not been directed by Corey Yuen, he would have had a comfortable career as a solid character player, like he was in, The Mean Machine and, Lock, Stock and, all those other movies he did in England. And he was just doing those. He was, when I remember seeing him in Snatch and everything and thinking, oh, he's a good, solid character player, and this is a guy that's going to be around. No idea that he could fight like that. And then, of course, you see Transporter and you've got a new action star. Late in life, Liam Neeson suddenly got reinvented with Taken, right? But it's like the films made them. So I suppose what would have to happen is that Michael getting cast in a picture that had the qualities necessary to be a theatrical film, and then you'd go to another level. But I think it's not him, it's the films, because I think the work he does is wonderful. It's just, and I have to say, I do understand that mindset that still exists of like, well, we've got the A-list theatrical star, but it's an increasingly small number of people who are supposedly surefire. It's not a secret that everybody said Tom Cruise saved the theatrical market. Yeah, because he's Tom Cruise, right? And he's fantastic.
The right movie, Top Gun, the newer Top Gun was just done so well. That's
fantastic. But my point is, it's like, it's a lot to ask of somebody. Why have you not joined that level? There's so few people at that level, and you can actually have a healthy career, as Michael has done. I mean, he's done some really, Blood and Bone, terrific.
That's the one that I really like.
And that had, a dear friend of mine who passed away some while ago, but was confirmed a few weeks by Julian Sands, who was the villain in The Medallion, and was also in Blood and Bone with Michael. And I remember Julian calling me and he said, I'm with the kind of guys that you like to hang out with, the ones that kick all the time. I said, yep, that's me. So, no, I think Michael's fantastic. Maybe we'll still do Harlem Goes East. I've still got the script. It's a good piece.
Yeah, you should message him after this or
good.
something.
Now, you know what? Talking to you is fantastic, because I spent, it's a writer's life, I guess, because I do think of myself as a writer who does other things. But you end up in kind of a bubble with your own thoughts and ideas, and you're constantly trying to be creative. But talking to you is great. I should do that more with people, like just bouncing ideas back and forth, because I've got probably 5 ideas from our conversation. But yeah, I should write to so-and-so. So we'll see.
What's interesting, though, talking about like that other level of the theatrical guys.
Yeah.
You really got to get lucky to be in the right project that goes to the theater and is successful. And then you'll probably be in another film that goes to the theater, and then you could probably eventually get the lead. But I feel like a lot of guys, they'll get, and this happened, of course, in the 80s and 90s, where they're just in that string of straight to video movies, and they just get kind of pigeonholed, they can never break out. Whereas like, if you get lucky early, maybe within a few movies in your career, and you're kind of getting those theater movies, you could probably maintain. But a lot of times those guys even end up in the straight to video world. But I've never really seen a guy in that straight to video world just go up a level. It's almost like you just get stuck there.
The trend has been now, and I think it's even less likely to happen, because you've got like 2711, is that the company, where they are so talented in terms of taking people like Charlize Theron and Keanu Reeves and actors and teaching them to do action. Who was the guy in My Name Is Nobody, or was it Nobody? That guy, he's a comedian, and they made him look like he could fight.
Yeah,
so it's like, then the trend is, well, we'll get a guy who's perceived to be a conventional actor. I mean, people forget this, but Wesley Snipes was, prior to Blade, not regarded as an action star. He was a conventional, dramatic
he's an amazing actor. He made the transition. I did a whole video about that back in the past, because he kind of went the other direction, where great actor and then an action star, whereas all these other action stars wanted to become like great actors. Like Van Damme and
So I think it's
didn't
just
want
like
to do
when you get
action
someone
movies.
like Matt Damon and you put him in, what's the great line in what is it, 60-Year-Old Virgin? I always thought of Matt Damon as a bit of a Streisand, but when I saw him in Bourne Identity, so they put him in Bourne and he became an action star overnight, even though it was still the Matt Damon we know and love, who's known as an actor, right? So that's the trend, unfortunately. But as I say, I don't know. What can happen is, like happened with Seagal, that you have somebody who's in the right place at the right time, who gets put in a vehicle that works theatrically, and they can have a career. It's all material driven. It's interesting. Everything else has changed, except for the fact that you need a decent script. You need a good script to make something.
Is always key. Hey, one last thing. I wanted to ask about Jet Li.
Well, that was it's funny. I never really I knew Jet in Hong Kong over the years in China, and I didn't have any great warmth towards him. He blew hot and cold. He was somebody where if you were with people, like if I was with Donnie or if I was with Jack Ma or somebody, he was very respectful and nice. And if you just saw him in passing, he would almost like ignore you. He is quite I found him not to have, in Buddhism, you try to have loving kindness where you make everybody happy. And I think his attitude was like, him and Jackie are like opposite reactions to the same cause. Both of them had really miserable childhoods where they were like, kind of trained and abused, beaten to the point of being abused. And Jackie's reaction to that was, I was unhappy and I'm going to make sure no one's ever unhappy again. I want everybody to be happy. And Jet's was, I was miserable and that's your chance to suffer too. So that's where he came from. So I always greatly admired him as a screen performer. And he did a brace of movies where he really knocked the roof off as an actor. One was Danny the Dog, which I think is called Unleashed, where he was between Morgan Freeman and Bob Hoskins. And if you can't learn acting when you're with those two, good luck.
Yeah.
I did those. Then he came back and did his true masterpiece, Fearless, where if you look at his performance in that film, if you look at the deleted scenes, the sensitivity and the arc of that character, I'm not talking about the action, is sublime. So I'm separating the man from the art. I mean, I never liked him much as a person, but I admired him hugely as a performer. And then, of course, he moved to LA and very much pursued a happy family life in LA. And I believe he had these health issues. And I know there was one, he was meant to be in XXX with Vin Diesel. And my understanding is they were all ready to roll, costumes ready, contract almost done. And then right before, the insurance company refused to bond him because of this health issue. And then they called Donnie. And I remember Donnie called me and I said, like, I got to go there. And I was just adjusting the costumes and everything. And he got a good payday and a nice platform. I'm trying to remember the time frame because I think that was before Rogue One. But anyway, it was a good opportunity for Donnie. But it fell into his lap because of poor Jet. And of course, the thing is, I always feel if I just say about everybody in my experience that they're great, then it's like it
doesn't mean anything then.
Well, it kind of like sells short my true feelings. If I say everybody's nice, then people are going to, well, does he really like me or not? So a couple of people I've mentioned, like Robin Shue, in the minority, most people I work with, I much admire and like. Robin Shue was one, and Jet was another. Couldn't figure him out. He very petty about things sometimes, but my understanding now is that his health is sufficient that he can have a rewarding life with his family day by day, which I would wish on him and for him to be happy. Even if somebody in the past I didn't have a good relationship with them, I in general don't wish for them to suffer. I want them to be happy somewhere else in some cases. But I think his health is not sufficiently stable for him to do American films where he would have to be bonded by an insurance company. This is what I believe. And then he probably could work in China if he chose to. But I think he maybe feels with justification that he's got an incredible run of films.
Definitely. Yeah. And he blew up in America quite a bit. And
yeah.
So that was the interesting story. That was the interesting thing because he was really big. I mean, he started with the Lethal Weapon. I forget if it was the fourth one, maybe. I remember Kiss of the Dragon. Like I was watching these things in the theater because he was really kind of
same director as Chris Nolan, same director.
Yeah,
as,
it was cool because
Lady Blood Fight. God help us.
Oh, really?
But,
because a lot of our guys, like Van Damme and Seagal, was starting to go straight to video, but at least he had like Jet Li and Statham doing these theatrical release martial art films. And he was doing some really good stuff. And then all of a sudden,
one of their movies that I thought was really underestimated was War, the one with him and
Statham. Oh, with him and Statham, yeah.
Very interesting ideas, interesting action, good acting. One of those that kind of just slipped under the radar. Maybe I think it was successful, but it wasn't like mega successful. Sure. No. I mean, he definitely. And going back to Tony Jaa, this was something nobody really got on Tony Jaa's case and said, "Look, you got to learn English." It never happened, and to this day, I still think he didn't learn to the level that Jackie did, even Samo did, and Jet Li definitely did. Jet Li had a guy, I think his name was Jason, living in his house and just teaching him English day by day by day by day by day, and then moved to America and did the films he did in the States. By which point, you see him doing interviews to promote Lethal Weapon, and he's relatively fluent. Good on him. So yeah, I mean, and he was back and forward doing movies in the States and then doing films in China. And I think the only reason he stopped is the health issues. That I also think because of the demand of doing any kind of action film, he may feel quite rightly why potentially reduce the number of the years he had, like LIC. I hope that's not true. By doing action film, he's already done the best of the best. I mean, you line up his movies like Fist of Legend, Tai Chi Master. They're all. He's got an incredible run. So yeah. But I wish. Look, I mean, I don't know. I didn't warm to the guy when he was here. I think the other thing is I was regarded rightly as Donnie's guy, and so that might have been part of it. Though I remember I'll tell you one story I would never forget. It was the Chinese New Year, Chinese handover celebration at Queen Elizabeth Stadium, and I was there with Donnie. We were doing a Fist of Fury show on the stage, and so I remember I was backstage warming up with Donnie, and then we walked in and we're underneath the stage, and they were doing some kind of performance, and they were going to move on and do the kung fu section of the celebrations, and then I became aware of somebody moving closer on the left. So being kind of bodyguard guy, I was about to push him back, and I turned, and it's Jet Li. And I was like, oh, and they greeted each other, and Jet Li. And that in that circumstance, was very nice, charming to me. And then they were going to do this thing with Jet Li where he comes up on a platform onto the stage and starts doing his Tai Chi and whatever, so wushu. And so they were warming up, and Donnie was doing his whole Bruce Lee thing. And next to him is Jet Li. And I'm like, wow. Again, I didn't have a camera. Or a phone, right? Sure. It was like Bruce Lee and Wong Fei Hung side by side. And I remember that it was just the most incredible thing. And I was looking behind me, and there was a line of guys walking, and it was Jackie Chan, Sammo Hung, and Bu. And I thought, wow, I'm really at like ground zero for Kung Fu tonight, Kung Fu movies. But if you ever see that footage, I think it's on YouTube, they have Jet rising up, and he walks across a sea of silk, and the music, the drums playing, and honestly, yeah, he really, as a charismatic person. I mean, even before, I think there was definite quantum improvement in his acting in something like Fearless. But even when you go back to Once Upon a Time in China, have you seen those films?
Yeah, back in the day.
They have that love story playing all the way through with him and this woman who's technically his 13th aunt, that they're not blood relatives, played by the wonderful Rosamund Kwan. And in the second film, she's in deadly danger. They're all in deadly danger, and these people at the White Lotus are attacking the embassy, and he sends her away, and she runs back, and she says, you're always the man in my heart. And then she runs away, and the camera just goes in on Jet. It's fantastic. It's just transcendent. I always remember those moments, and that's what made Jet special. A lot of people in China could do wushu, right? And can do a lot of the stuff he could do. But and they've tried, but how interesting are they just in close up? That's the question. And I think that's people say, oh, he's so good at jumping around. Yeah, there's like 20,000 guys in China.
A lot of guys, sure. do that.
Right. As a film critic and fighter, what criteria do you use for quality impact of martial art films? To me, I mean, I don't differentiate. I mean, to me, of course, you can enjoy a movie just for the fights and dispense with the other aspects of it. But if you ask me what's a quality film, it would be a movie where all the elements that make cinema, which would be, you know, the editing, the performances, the music, the action sequences, the mise en scène, everything works towards telling a story that really engages you. And that can be a Western, it can be a science fiction film, it can be a martial arts movie. But I don't feel that I shift to another sensibility when looking at a martial art movie, other than it's possible with a martial art film that you might have something that's really terrible, and then there's one classic, incredible fight scene, and you can appreciate it just for that. And it may be true of other films as well. But, you know, favorite martial art film, I always fall back on Prodigal Son by Gatai, because two reasons. I mean, I think it's Sammo Hung's masterpiece. It's an incredible piece of storytelling with amazing action. And I was on the set of it when I was 19 or 20 years old. So I have emotional resonance to it as well. But I would say that would be that one. And then my favorite Western foreign one, of course, is Bloodsport, like everybody.
Oh, I thought you was going to say Enter the Dragon would have been your top martial arts film.
You know what's funny? I guess you're right. I mean, I still count Enter Dragon more as a Chinese Hong Kong film, and I would still. There are other Hong Kong films I would hold. It's a strange hybrid.
Yeah,
it is great. It's my favorite Bruce Lee film, that's for sure.
Sure.
But yeah, maybe okay. So if we count Enter the Dragon as a foreign film, then it would be Enter the Dragon, closely followed by Bloodsport.
Okay.
I just want to make you happy by saying Bloodsport, but
no, it does. It does. But I know you're like the Bruce Lee guy. You know, I mean, you're also
Bolo Young.
But
all right, let me tell you a story about Bolo. So Bolo had a massive cult following in the wake of Bloodsport, more than Enter the Dragon, really. Bloodsport really gave him this big, and he was doing movies like Breathing Fire, and then the Shoot Fighter films, which were kind of vehicles to really push him in the video market in the West. And I, at the time, was working for a magazine called Martial Arts Illustrated, or it was based in the north of England, so it was Martial Arts Illustrated. So they were based up in the north of England, and I was dispatched to Hong Kong to sign Bolo to appear in an event called Clash of the Titans, or is it Clash of Titans? So he was going to be the star, and we'd had some initial conversation about what we're paying him and everything. So I kind of went out to Hong Kong to seal the deal. So to track him down, I walked the Bolo Triangle. If you walk it, he will come. There was the New David Gym, the very good seafood restaurant, and the Kimberley Hotel. And that within that triangle every day, Bolo would be sighted. It's a true story. Ask anybody from that era. So I was staking out these three places. Finally found him in the coffee shop of the Kimberley Hotel. Sat down. That time my Cantonese was not as it is perhaps today. So I had somebody with me helping to translate and whatever. And it was great. You want to come to the show? Yes. You want to do this? How much money you want? That. What are your conditions? Perfect. And I thought, wow, this whole booking Bolo gig is easier than I thought. And then we got down to, I said, so what do you want to do for a demonstration? You know, you do something physical. And I said, do you want to like fight some guys? No. Do you want to do your Tai Chi? No. Do you want to break some boards? No. And I'm like, what do you want to do? He goes, I sing song. And I'm like, you want to sing a song? I am a good singer. I said, well, what am I going to say? You know, it's like, I'm not going to be Simon Cowell in front of Bolo. So I was like, yeah, you're a good singer. Okay. And you want to sing a song? Okay. That's it. And he goes, yes. And he goes, I sing song in memory, Bruce Lee. And I said, okay. So I'm like, what? Now, as I went to report back to the guys at Martial Arts Illustrated, I'm thinking, okay, on one level, you're going, Bolo beats up somebody. We've seen that dozens of times.
Sure.
But Bolo goes solo. This is something we've never seen. And I just had a vision in my mind of like a long staircase, and it would be like Young Frankenstein if Bolo in top hat and tails, you know, comes down. And I mean, and the audience of all the martial art people going, And you'd be on every newspaper, you'd be on every television show. Jonathan Ross, everybody would have been crazy for it. That's what I was just thinking to myself. I thought, well, maybe there's something here. And then I called back and got Roy Jessup, who was the head of the magazine. He goes, "Hey, what's going on over there, Bear? Did you get me signed up?" And I'm like, "No, he wants to sing us a song." And he goes, "He's stringing us along." "No, he wants to sing a song." What? And then the kind of, hello? That was that. So we never got Bolo to come. Okay. But he's I've tried again and again to, we've been very friendly over the years. I've seen him in Hong Kong many times. I like him a lot. I met him in LA. And for some reason, every time we're about to close the deal for him to do something, he, I believe, feels that there's a better offer out there, that if he waits, he'll get it. And I had a movie I did called Beach Spike, about Kung Fu women's beach volleyball. And we wanted Bolo to play the teacher who teaches the girls Kung Fu to make them better at beach volleyball. And we had a whole deal set up. And then he called and he said he had to get territories, like he wanted Poland and Germany. And it was, no, we're just going to pay you a fee to come and do the film. At that time, in Hong Kong anyway, he was not known at all, sorry to say. So it would have been like a comeback for him. And in the end, we used another actor, Law Mong, who was in Five Deadly Venoms and whatever. And then more recently, there was all set up to do this big documentary with him. And
yeah, I was going to ask about that. Like, it never came out.
Never got met. It was fully financed. It had a very good director on board, the same guy. Probably you like his work. He did the Cannon documentary. He did Machete Maidens. I'm blanking on his name. The Australian guy. He was going to direct it. Brett Ratner was going to produce.
Wow.
And it was all set up. And it was, it's late night. There was another gentleman, I think he's Polish, the gentleman who kind of put the whole thing together. And, I became involved with it. And then we were ready to roll and finance everything at the last minute. And part of it was we needed at least a day with Bolo to do interviews. And the last minute, just word came back, no, I don't want to do it. We had a strange meeting. I saw him in Edinburgh, and he would come up with it. He'd be looking. It's like his famous thing in the movies is like not looking, and he would like not look, and you'd ask him a question, and then he'd go, Golden Harvest, and then you're like, yeah, went out of business 10 years ago. So it was, I don't know or 20 years, whatever it was. So at that point, when the documentary finished, I'm actually going to write a book about Bolo and the Bolo phenomenon. But I didn't have any further. I didn't feel it was in our interest or my interest to keep badgering him to be in films and documentaries and whatever. So
yeah, it's interesting because I know they filmed some of it. I was even talking to his son David because he was, of course, in the last Kumite as well.
Great guy, and I remember him coming to visit me. I remember him coming to visit me forever ago to talk about Beach Spike, but really to apologize and say, yeah, my dad's like that. He often pulls out of stuff at the last minute because it was disappointing not to do the film. But yeah, and they did shoot stuff. To be honest, they'd shot stuff, but to me, it was like when we became involved, I'd be involved. We really had the idea that we'd do something. You've seen Electric Boogaloo, right? The Cannon Films documentary, and you've seen that, right?
I want to rewatch. There's two Cannon
The
films.
Go-Go Boys and Electric Boogaloo. The guy we had is the guy that did Electric Boogaloo and Machete Maidens, which is about Philip, and Not Quite Hollywood, the one about Australian exploitation films. He'd done a run of those. And then he recently did a remake of Martin, which is an Australian horror film. Talented guy. And this was also, and I think we would have rebooted it at a slightly better level. And we would have had the cornerstone to it was to do an interview with Bolo, but it wasn't going to happen. Listen,
that's a shame.
You have stuff that happens that you stuff that out of nowhere becomes popular or gets done and is a great experience. Maybe like you have with Last Kumite, and then you have stuff where you think it's a no-brainer. Like we were going to pay Bolo, and he just sits in a hotel room and is interviewed, and everything else is done by us. And it comes out, and he's got this wonderful legacy project. And for some reason, that's not what he wants. So, that's that.
Yeah, that's a shame. People would love to see that documentary.
I know. So. Well, listen, the thing is, it didn't happen with that configuration. And I'm not interested in doing it anymore. But somebody else may come in. And as I said earlier, I'm the first one. If you announce let's say you were doing a bowler documentary, I'd be like, great, when's it coming out? I can't wait to see it. You know, I just look at it and go, if I didn't try my best, if I didn't apply my energy to try to make something happen, then I might feel a bit bitter. But if I tried my best and it didn't happen, if somebody else does it, I'd be like, great, let's see how it turned out. Let's see how good it is. And I can enjoy it as an audience, you know. And that actually, I enjoy it more because if I made it, all I do is sit there and go, oh my God, look at that day. That was so bad. And we should have cut that.
Yeah. If you'd be self-critical
right.
of it, sure.
Otherwise, if somebody else does it, I can really sit back
and just enjoy it for what it is.
You know, have a nice time and not worry about, laugh and smile and whatever, not have any worry about, you know, how I messed up this time.
For sure.
To
answer this
that was a great
question
review.
Real quick. Yeah, and thanks for the 17, I don't know if that's Danish krone or whatever currency that is. Thank you. The last Kumite hit Netflix. So there is a US distribution deal in place, and as far as I know, it'll be out in March or April of 2024. As far as where it will stream, I'm not sure. I know there's going to be physical copies, which is going to be awesome, but I don't know about what streaming service.
I would think, I mean, doesn't everything have to end up? Mark Hartley. Oh, hey, who the hell? Who knows that? Oh, you checked
Simon knows that, apparently.
The names of those guys. I said the documentary. Mark Hartley. Apologies to Mark. Awesome. I watched Hidden Strike. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I do think that's been the huge problem. And I've definitely done my fair share of CGI heavy films. But I definitely think that whole dependence on lousy CGI on part of Chinese filmmakers has been to the detriment of the industry. And I don't want to point fingers like this gentleman is doing. You know what I actually do? I can tell you my run of books that I'm doing at the moment. The problem with books, even compared to films, which are quite slow to produce, is particularly the kind of books I'm doing, it just takes so long to do. Even if you work at them quite hard, it's a slow process. Filling, like you do a script, it's like he said, she said, he said, she said. You do pages of text, it's like heavy lifting. So my very next book probably will be Jackie Chan and I. Oh no, the next book will be the final the print version of 36 Chambers of Kung Fu Cinema Volume 2. So you have 2 of those, and then Jackie Chan and I, which I'm still doing interviews for. Yesterday, interviewed a lovely lady called Doris Lung, who was actually was a major star in Taiwan for a run of films. And we interviewed her, and she said, no one's interviewed me for years and years. And I didn't want to talk about it, but she talked about her experiences working with Jackie, and that was wonderful. So I keep doing more and more towards Jackie Chan and I. And then I'm going to do a novel. I did a book already called Daughters of Han, which is like a sequel to Enter the Dragon. And then I'm doing a book about Fist of Fury, the Bruce Lee film. And it's called The Strange Disappearance of Disciple Number 2. And it's about, there really is an actress who's in Fist of Fury, quite prominently, who disappeared, and nobody seems to know what happened to her. So my story, my novel is kind of exploring what might have happened to her. And it's set. So that has a lot of the history of Golden Harvest in a novelistic setting.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And I have a contract to do another book about a famous Hong Kong kung fu filmmaker. Don't want to say who, because it's like, you know, I don't know, maybe it's sensitive to certain people, but I'm going to do that book. And then I just think about doing the kind of like And I series and keep going. And so I'll probably do Samo or Donnie as
I was going to say Donnie would make a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And then a third novel in that Bruce Lee spin-off series. And then, you know, beyond that, I'm not sure. And of course, it's possible I might do a book for another company, but these are the books that I'm doing for my own company. And then we're doing books about Kung Fu, and we're going to do like a Taschen style Kung Fu label with like art house books, which kind of capture the culture, photographs and ideas. Not like those books you see, the Kuhn Po, and it's like right fist, left fist, punch, whatever. Those are great, but we're not doing those. We're doing another kind of book. We just kind of capture the culture more. So that's my next run. But
that's a lot of books.
That's a lot to do. That's a lot of pages, right? But I do think there actually is if you're interested, Simon, there is actually a the Hong Kong Film Archive have a book about the Golden Harvest Studios. And if I remember correctly, they sell it and it's Chinese, but there's a disc with the English version in it, with it, that you can buy. So if you look at the Hong Kong Film Archive website, I think you can find it. I read that and it helped me research my other books. So you might like to look at that. That's a good book about the history of Golden Harvest.
Very cool. And one last comment. This is a
They
perfect
must be
segue.
tired. It's 1:44. Yeah. On a Saturday night. As I said at the beginning to David, at the beginning of this, it's like it's Saturday night in the big city. I've got nothing better to do than talk to Viking samurai.
Well, we started late. I'm sure you already had a lot
I
of
love
fun
it.
earlier in the night.
It's great to do.
But yeah, it's crazy. You're just like an encyclopedia of knowledge about everything. Like everything that came up. I didn't know if you'd have great comments or stories about everything, but you did. And I'm sure you have so much more. So obviously, I'll get you back on in the
I've been in
future.
Hong Kong now 30 years and, have had the temerity not to die or retire. And I had, for whatever reason, I was like the Leonard Zelig of Kung Fu. You always see me kind of like when Donnie did his big benefit, not benefit film, but the big movie. What was it called? The Kung Fu Jungle. Was it called Kung Fu Jungle in the end? Anyway, it was a movie about there's a Kung Fu assassin and Donnie comes out of prison to get him. And the reason he's in prison is because he's killed me. And like everybody was in that film. Like even they had a Bruce Lee picture on the wall. They had Jackie Chan on TV. They had Raymond Chow on camera. And then I was in there as the guy getting killed. And so I was really proud. I think there's me and Mark Gabrino, the makeup artist, are the only two foreigners in the end credits. But actually, for that era of Hong Kong filmmaking, yeah, we are the two guys that should be in there. Nobody else was really relevant for that period of time, I have to say. There were a couple of guys who were my mentors, like Andre Morgan and Roy Horan, who probably should have had a shout out. But the guys since then were not, I don't think they should have been mentioned the way that we were. So that was really wonderful. And it made me think, gosh, I was so blessed to be in Hong Kong during that exciting era, and to kind of have access to all areas, and not to be looking through the glass like a lot of foreign people are, I think, where they're like, oh, I wish. And I know people in Hong Kong, it's by their own doing, that they've lived in Hong Kong longer than me, but they're still, to some degree, outsiders, that people don't know them. The language is a big thing. I mean, Cantonese is a difficult language, and I managed to converse in it relatively effectively, and it's a huge plus. Definitely.
Sure.
Yeah. So that was the thing, but I'm glad I could provide any. And by the way, I'm very findable on social media. If anybody wants to write and ask me other questions, I try to answer them. I'm not a big chat back and forward all the time kind of guy. But if somebody asks
too many books to write,
that's it. Well, that's the other thing, is that sometimes, like, one thing with the Bruce Lee book was, though it's funny because now, of course, I had said in its pages, all this footage will never be found. And there it is. They've just found all this stuff from Game of Death and what have you, Vander and Bush. So what did I know? But I was like kind of going, when people ask me Bruce Lee, I said, oh, how did Bruce Lee? I said, read my book. And then it's interesting. It does show you the enduring legacy of Bruce Lee. Like, of all the books I've written, the one that sold out the quickest was the Bruce Lee one. It's almost sold out. It just, that name has it's a heavyweight thing.
Oh, sure.
And I think people will be interested in it. What's funny is that Bruce Lee made 4.5, 5 movies and died at 32. And you look online, you go to Amazon, there's like 60 books, 70 books, all by him, about him, in print. And then for Jackie, who's made 100 films, still alive, still relevant as a filmmaker, massive fan base, it's like 10 books, I think. And 3 of them are by him. So I don't even think there's 10. So I do feel there's a gap in the marketplace. They can be like a definitive.
Oh, sure.
Jackie
sure.
But it's interesting when you write these things. I mean, obviously, I've known Jackie a long time, and I'm telling his story. But what's fascinated me is when you've seen people in his films or in his orbit, and you go and track them down and do a proper interview with them, and you get the window into their lives. And that's been so fascinating for me, because I feel, well, there's two kinds of people. There's those I've seen on film and not met,
Mhm.
and there are those who I knew in the orbit of Jackie, but we never really had a long, intense conversation the way you might for an interview. So that's been really an unexpectedly rewarding aspect of the book. Oh, thank you, Perry. Perry, probably his name is Perry, right? Perry
Yeah,
fan.
Perry fan 49.
Right.
When do you think this book might come out?
It definitely will come out at the end of this year.
So it's coming out this year. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
then.
well, and I can tell you honestly, the reason it has not come out before now is basically I've been constantly going, you know what? I bet I can find somebody else, or this chapter, I bet we can do this. So until you sign off on the whole thing, you can't print it. So I was constantly finding new people to talk to and new information, and that slowed the process down. But now we've refocused the company, we're rebranding our publishing arm and going, this is something, because my thing is like, I'll make movies. There's plenty of people making movies. If I started doing commentaries and interviews again, there's probably other people doing that. Writing the kind of books that we can do as a company on this subject of Chinese martial culture, both the films and the kung fu, I don't think anybody else is going to do it, could do it, will do it. So that's why I'm focusing more at this stage of my life on stuff that something uniquely. And I used to get a real kick out of, going away for 8 months to be in New Zealand. And now I'm like, I don't know. If it's a great project. How long were you in Germany for?
The entire film, I think they knocked it out in a month, and I was there for like 2.5 weeks roughly. It was a blast. That was the first time I was in Germany.
Yeah, that time frame is kind of there was a period of time when we were doing it. In the movie I did with Ross, we shot that Vixen in like 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks in Yuhuan. That was kind of okay, but I remember like doing these big epics like Medallion and Crouching Tiger, and where Crouching Tiger, I think I was away for 8 months.
That's a long time to be gone.
A long time to be away from home.
Wow.
It's a long time if you have kids, and it's a long time to be in your own world. And I remember thinking, the loneliness. I mean, but boo-hoo, like poor me. There I am in New Zealand. I had a lovely time doing it, but it's something where I think the saddest thing is when you got somebody my age who had not yet achieved what they wanted to and is hanging on hopefully. This, I think, will be quite difficult. But in my case, I think, well, I did my Medallion, I did Crouching Tiger, I did Fury. Fury, the first one, was the most successful Vietnamese film, and Furies, whatever. So you say, okay, well, that's done. And then what are the next round of challenges? But definitely, the project Matthias and I are talking about, or a film like Last Kumite, where you say, oh, you were there for a month and you do this. Yeah, that's kind of doable. The films I did in the past, they would require this massive amount of, they treat you really nicely, but I don't know. I mean, to me, if you're not at home and if you're not with your family and friends, it wears thin. However nice the car is and however nice but I remember we did when I did Crouching Tiger, this lovely apartment in Auckland in New Zealand, and a car to take me to the set. You couldn't criticize any aspect of it other than, it wasn't home.
Yeah,
and I would
picture.
Hong Kong's funny. Like all of us that live in Hong Kong, we've got we complain about it endlessly. Oh, it's too loud, it's crowded, people are rude, all this stuff you said about New York, right? But then when you're away and you see a movie clip of Hong Kong or a picture of Hong Kong, you're like, Hong Kong. You feel like you miss it. Yeah. It's like I left my heart in San Francisco, so that's that. But anyway. And I'm really happy because in this wonderful post-COVID era, more people are coming to Hong Kong, and I think with our Kwai Fong Martial Club, we offer a unique experience where you can come and train in traditional martial arts. You can meet me. We can watch movies. You can get We have bona fide Hong Kong movie memorabilia. You're so kind, Kino Stakwelki.
Polish.
Go to www.realeast.com. That's www.reeleast.com. And my books are on there, and I believe on Amazon and all the other places as well. But we're kind of a boutique house, so I normally I would say on the Bruce Lee and Eyes that we sold out the print run, that was almost all through the Real East site. and also in the bookstores in Hong Kong, and including Swindon, which is closed down now, unfortunately. But that was the store where Bruce Lee bought his own books.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really happy to be on there. But thank you so much for those kind words. Yeah, it's probably the only subject.
Here's more kind words. The audience loves you.
Is that who's that? Is that Edison? That's Ed7. So you never know. I mean, so are these guys? Is his name really Ed, or he just puts that on as
who knows when it comes to online stuff?
Yeah. No, because I want to say thank you, but I'm thinking Ed. Because I used to work with a guy called Edison Chen, and it looks like the kind of name that Ed would use. Edison would use.
Interesting.
We did it. Well, did you see Gen X Cops, Gen Y Cops? Those movies, David. Did you see Gen X Cops or Gen Y Cops?
I have not. I have not seen nearly the amount
they were
of
produced
Hong Kong
by Jackie Chan. They're produced by Jackie Chan, and they were like a bit like Mod Squad. 21 Jump Street. Okay. They got these kind of like juvenile delinquents and put them to be cops. Mm-hmm. And the first one was really successful, and the second one was a lot of fun, but it was less successful. But the white hero in the second film is Paul Rudd.
I'm aware of that one. Sure, that's funny.
Yeah, because he's always on talk shows talking about it and quoting dialogue from it, and I'm like, yes. But I tell you, the weird thing about that was the director, Benny Chan, rest his soul, who was a dear, sweet man. He had a certain image of how a Hollywood actor should behave and how the character should be. And Paul used to come in and do a scene, and we would be falling around laughing, and Benny would like go, no, I don't want it funny. And so Paul would have to, not really be Paul Rudd.
Sure.
And I always felt that was kind of a shame. But he was being interviewed one time, and he said, "What's the best line you've ever said in a movie?" And he said it was, "Roseanne Barr Arnold will be president of the United States before you two punks see the light of day." And he says that was from Gen Y Cops. And it was written by me, so I was
that's your line. That's
happy. Yeah. But honestly, we had him doing action. We had him doubled by a guy called Ron Smurenberg. Amazing.
Oh, Ron. Yeah, I had him on the channel.
Ron is so tall. And
he is very tall.
So tall. And then we had him on this. We had Paul Rudd at a trailer park, like a container park, with all the metal containers, the shipping containers. And then he was like going to go over the side, and he was so scared of heights. Wire upon wire upon wire. If you would have told me that this guy was going to be Ant-Man, I'd be like, no way. Because Ant-Man, in my mind, it must be having wires and flying around and doing action. But he did. In turn, he became Ant-Man. But that was his action debut for Jackie and everybody on Gen Y. And Maggie Kia is the first film Maggie and I worked together. So I got to know.
Wow, so much. So I'll have to get you back on in the future. This has been 3 hours. It's late where you're at. There's like you got too many great stories. We never covered
another book and/or another film. Well, you know what's funny is when I know I'm going to be on your show, I'll be thinking to myself, now, you know what? I should tell him this story. I should tell him that story. And then after, obviously, I did the best I could. But then, after about half an hour of the show, I'll be like, I meant to tell him. Never mind. It's okay. Well, like you say,
so many great things. And if guys, you're catching this later than when we started, you need to rewind because Bey Logan fought in the Kumite. He's a Kumite fighter. That's a real story. But you guys got to rewind and watch that if you missed it earlier.
I know. That'll be. That's
an amazing story. I love that one.
No, well, it was just. I mean, I was really bursting to. I remember I emailed you about it because I had been following that whole thing and going, I don't get it. It's like, and you told me something I didn't know about Benny.
Yeah,
that's a crazy story. But I'm going, yes, what he's talking about, the kernel of the story in Bloodsport, as told in the movie Bloodsport, did happen. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why there'd be a question about that. But then when I see some of the other things that Duke Sensei apparently is saying or have added into the mythology, then you have to go, okay, that bit I don't get. But if you just say you fought in an underground thing in Hong Kong and there was no press and they were gambling and it was triads, which is kind of the movie, right?
Sure, yeah.
That is what it was. And I had that little taste of it myself, but I absolutely can tell you incontrovertibly that Bloodsport events did happen. I don't think they happen anymore for various reasons, but they did happen back in the 70s and the 80s. And it's entirely possible that a white guy could have been in my situation where somebody just says, "Oh, hey, let's have him fight," and you get up and do it. And mind you, there's a lot of guys out there, more than I, who would go, "Oh, great, an opportunity to show my, my killer instinct," which I don't think, I was not cut from that cloth. But I'm really happy to have the experience. I was happy to have the experience in Taiwan. Anyway, just throw that out there. I don't know how that factors into the ongoing controversy over whether Bloodsport was a true story or not. I mean, I suppose what I can add to it is I don't know if it was, but it could have been.
Sure, for sure.
I don't know if that's been established because I've never heard anybody talk about this before. They always just picked holes in what Duke Sensei was saying or whatever the history of that was. But I've never seen anybody come out and say, no, that what you see in the film is more likely than any of the other stories about the Bahamas and pirates. And I haven't really followed all of it clearly, but there seem to be a lot of other elements that I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, they could make a couple of other Bloodsport movies, better ones than the ones with Daniel Bernhardt with the Frank Duke stories. But
yeah, well, I definitely when I tried to do Lady Bloodsport before we changed Lady Blood Fight.
Yeah, sure.
We had Frank Duke's story confirmed real by JJ.
Oh, there you go, an exclusive.
Was it confirmed by me? Okay, then there you go. Thank you, Frank Dukes. You're welcome. But it was like the reason that they kicked up Ed Pressman, now late Ed Pressman, had the rights, and they were planning to do it.
Wait, Ed Pressman's dead?
Yes.
When? Since when?
Oh, I think. About 6 months ago. I'm sorry to give you bad news.
Oh, really? Because I do talk to Alberto Lenzi, the guy that owns the rights, and he was working with Ed Pressman. They were going to do it through Universal. They were going to get like the UFC involved in this.
No, I've still got this.
I didn't know Ed Pressman passed because I even talked to his assistant. I forget the guy's name off the top of my head.
Pretty sure.
He probably did. I know he was old, but that sucks.
Yeah, I know. He was a very talented. I mean, he produced Conan, The Crow. He was going to do this Bloodsport remake. I still have the cease and desist letter from him, which I have a few of those. So I kind of I keep that for posterity. But yeah, because they didn't like the idea of us calling the film Lady Blood Sport.
Sure.
So we changed it. It was fine, no problem. But they keep talking about doing a remake. And I remember being in Jean-Claude's kitchen in Hong Kong, and he actually acted out for me and Elizabeth, described for us beat for beat his version of it. I just couldn't. Well, no, I thought on your show, I think you had Sheldon on.
Yeah, he was talking about that.
Explain why it hadn't happened. Because I was my only involvement was he told it to me, and I said, look, if you need a company to be involved with this, or if you want help shooting this in Hong Kong, I'm your man. And then he was like, yes, they come back to you, and then never heard any more. And then when Sheldon told me the whole scenarios and whatever, I got, okay, I see why. Because it just seemed like a no-brainer. Well, it was the same thing we were saying about Timac, which is, do you then acknowledge the passing of the years, and you, like they did so wonderfully with the first Creed, you have a new young guy coming in who's some way related to the franchise, but the mentor figure is now Rocky. It's now, the Mr. Miyagi is going to be Jean-Claude or what have you, like we did with Kickboxer, right? And those films did well. So, I'm surprised. It just seems like an obvious thing that somebody should do.
I have the perfect idea for the real Bloodsport sequel that would actually work with Van Damme's age. It'd be better if they did it 10 years ago, but it'd still work now.
Yeah.
I could tell you about that another time. Because it is getting very late where you're at. But trust me, it would be perfect, man. And it even obviously ties in everything involved with Frank Dukes and everything else. And you could probably even formulate.
I would have thought anybody who had the rights could go to any of the platforms and say, I have the rights to Bloodsport. I'm doing Bloodsport, a proper Bloodsport 2 or Bloodsport Part 2, if you had to differentiate it. I love Daniel Bernhardt. I met him years ago when he was first going to do Bloodsport, and I feel bad, those films didn't really work, but he's had a great career since then. He's actually a very nice man. So I don't want to sound like I'm dissing him, but I did think, you could do a proper Bloodsport 2 with Jean-Claude, and, how's that going to be? And I thought anybody could go to any platform and say, hey, I've got Bloodsport 2, and they'd pay for it right away. It would be a Netflix original right away, and they would want to do it. So maybe that's the next step. And I almost hate to say this, but having a good script, having a good idea would be important.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember when we were doing, I wasn't involved with Kickboxer Vengeance, but with Retaliation, nobody really cared. They were just like, oh, you got the rights to Kickboxer.
Sure.
That was it. And
sure.
Everything but the kitchen sink into that film, for God's sake. Left, right, and center. It was just deranged. But anyway, that the Kickboxer franchise is what people were buying into. And I believe the Bloodsport franchise, I'm so surprised it hasn't been more effectively exploited, other than the Mark DeSalle pictures. Is Mark DeSalle still around?
As far as I know, yes. Oh, and there's something related to that. I'll tell you later off the record. I'll send you an email with all this Bloodsport info. I know too much because I do talk to Alberto Lenzi. I got the whole story. I even know how he got the rights. There's a whole story behind that. And, I told you he was working with, I guess now, the late Ed Pressman and all kinds of stuff. Like, it's kind of crazy because I never even heard of Alberto Lenzi until Sheldon Lettich had mentioned him, like, during an interview. And then the funny thing is, I did not get in contact with Alberto through Sheldon. It was just some other random event.
Right.
But yeah, crazy stuff.
And it's funny because, what can happen is, and I've had it in my own case, where you have a project that, most of us can only handle a finite number of film projects, book projects at a given time. And there's a tendency to go, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to get to it. And I'm not going to sell it. And I'm not going to give it to somebody else to do. I'm going to do it when I get to it. And that, I think, explains a lot of the times why properties are not are not realized.
Yeah.
It's because they're acquired by a company which already has a lot of content, and they go, okay, this has a value, and we're going to get to it. And they either do or they don't. But there are some obvious sequels that were not made, and of course, there's a fair few that got made that shouldn't have been. Right? It's a bit of a crapshoot.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so yes, it's 2 a.m. here in the city that never sleeps, and it's been wonderful talking to you and your viewers, I guess, not listeners so much, viewers. Thank you, everybody, for your kind comments. Feel free to reach out to me directly on social media. If you come to Hong Kong, I'd love to meet you. We can't stage a Kumite. So.
Not these days, because everybody would record it. It wouldn't work,
That's true. We'd have to confiscate the phones and everything at the door. But I've got the perfect set. I've got the setting for it. But I don't know. I think these things are much better on the screen. I don't think they're that much. As a guy who took a kick to the nuts in one, sure. I don't think it was much fun. I was the equivalent of the sumo, But you know the story that apparently there was a profile of Donald Trump and saying this reporter went with him at Thanksgiving. And it's a tradition in the Trump household. They watch Bloodsport,
as they should in every household.
It's one of Trump's favorite films.
Yeah,
and
he's got great taste in movies.
There's a scene when Jean-Claude does the splits and punches into the sumo's groin, and Trump laughs, and he says to the reporter, "I bet you're going to write Trump laughs." And the reporter wrote, "Trump laughed, and so did I." And I thought, yeah, quite right. I thought about it the other day because I was watching it with Sean and his friend, and they were laughing so hard. That guy, the guy who plays the sumo, David, he has been a casting director.
Really?
And he's also in the Jackie Chan film Protector at the end, fighting Jackie Chan. He bulked up considerably to be the sumo.
Who he was also in Double Impact. Most people don't know that. He got hook kicked in the face by Van Damme. Yeah. Well,
there's what happened with the movies that Jean-Claude did in Hong Kong is there was a finite pool of people that Salon Films would always call dear old Charles Wang. And so you saw the same people, John Chang and everybody like that. But no, it's fun. I was watching Bloodsport, and one of the guys is a Wing Chun guy, a student of Wong Chun Leung. And then, it's fascinating. You look at the locations in Hong Kong where everything was shot. Someone should do the Bloodsport tour and, kind of like we need to sell Hong Kong, where Bloodsport was filmed.
That's a tour right there to go to, man.
Have you been to Hong Kong before? Have you ever been there?
No, but when I do, I'll have to meet up with you, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. How many times have you watched Bloodsport?
I lost count.
Yeah. So you've basically been in Hong Kong in your mind.
Yeah, basically 80s Hong Kong. It'll look different though. They tore that whole section down. Where part of it was filmed. So
I know. Yeah. There are places that are the same, but yeah, you're right. I mean, it's a city that constantly changes, and I'm always complaining about the fact that we've again, it's weird. I'm here in Hong Kong complaining about we've lost our culture. Why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? But at the same time, I can't imagine living anywhere else, even given that, because it's my home.
Yeah.
So anyway, guys, thank you so much, and it's a pleasure as always. David, we'll stay in contact. Everybody else, please feel free to contact me. And Bey Logan signing off from the Wild East.
Thanks, Bey.
Oh man, you're welcome.
Now.
Yeah, totally.
All right.